Life will test you. It will challenge your patience, push you to your limits, and put obstacles in your path when you least expect it. The question isn't whether the storm will come, but whether your mind is strong enough to face it. Welcome to the ultimate guide to developing mental toughness with Stoicism. Mental toughness isn't about pretending that nothing affects you or pushing yourself forward with brute force. It's about staying calm when things go wrong, thinking clearly under pressure, and maintaining stability in a world full of uncertainty. The ancient Stoics mastered this kind of strength, not through motivation, but through mindset. In this guide, you'll discover how to train your mind like a Stoic, to endure discomfort, resist distractions, and stay focused on what really matters. You'll learn to develop discipline, handle setbacks with grace, and develop a quiet resilience that nothing and no one can break. Because strength isn't measured by how hard you hit, it's about how deeply rooted you are. Let's get started. I discovered Stoicism like most people discover oxygen after nearly drowning, desperate, gasping, and suddenly aware of what had been missing all along. The University of Athens library was charged with August heat when I first opened that worn copy of Marcus Aurelius. My hands were shaking from my third panic attack that week. The divorce papers were unsigned in my bag. The promotion I had worked for 3 years had been taken by someone's nephew. Everything I had built was crumbling like sand between my fingers. You have power over your mind, not over external events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The words hit me like cold water on burnt skin. I read them again and again. "Who wrote this?" I whispered to the old librarian watching me from behind her thick glasses. "Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor. He died about 800 years ago." She shuffled over, her cane tapping on the marble floor. "But you're asking the wrong question." "What's the right one?" "Where did he learn it?" She pulled another book from a high shelf with surprising ease. "The Stoa Poikile, the painted portico. That's where it all began, right here in Athens, around 300 BC. He opened the book to an illustration. A covered gallery adorned with murals, people gathered around a discussion. A Phoenician merchant named Zeno. His ship was wrecked off Piraeus. He lost everything, his cargo, his crew, his fortune. He arrived in Athens with nothing but his wet clothes and despair. That sounds familiar. He went into a bookshop. He started reading about Socrates. He asked the bookseller where he could find men like those. The bookseller pointed to a philosopher passing by, Crates the cynic. Zeno followed him. He began to learn. He began to think differently. He turned the page to show a bearded man addressing a small group of people. Zeno began teaching at the Stoa Poikile because he couldn't afford to rent a proper school. People called his followers Stoics after the portico. The name stuck, but the ideas... He tapped his temple. The ideas traveled. What ideas exactly? Simple ideas that seem impossible. He sat down next to me, his movements deliberate despite his age. Zeno taught that we do not suffer from events themselves, but from our judgments about them. The shipwreck that destroyed his life, he later called it good luck, saying that if he hadn't lost his cargo, he would never have discovered philosophy. I thought of the divorce papers. That's exaggerated. Is it? Tell me your problems. Can you change what has already happened? No. Can you force others to act differently? I've tried. No. Can you guarantee specific results? Obviously not. Then what is left? The question hung between us like dust in the afternoon light. My answer, I finally said. How I frame it. What I do next. Now you're thinking like a Stoic. He took out a notebook and drew a circle. Zeno and his students drew this. Inside this circle are your thoughts, your choices, your efforts, your attitudes. Outside, everything else. Other people's actions, past events, future uncertainties, your reputation, even the health of your body, ultimately. Is your body beyond your control? Can you command your heart never to fail, that your cells never mutate? You can influence through good habits, but total control. She shook her head. The Stoics were very precise with this distinction. Epictetus, who was born a slave, later said that we are all actors in a play we did not write. We do not choose the role, slave, emperor, rich, poor, but we choose how to play it. Epictetus was a slave, and Marcus Aurelius was emperor. Same philosophy, same practices, because external conditions do not determine internal strength. He turned to another page. Look, this is what Cleanthes, a disciple of Zeno, wrote. He worked as a water carrier at night to pay for his philosophy lessons during the day. When the authorities asked him how he earned a living with no visible income, his calloused hands were his proof. The text was in Greek, but she translated it. Guide me, Zeus, and you, Destiny, wherever you have ordained for me. I will follow you without hesitation. Even if I resist, in my wickedness, I will follow you anyway. That sounds like giving up. Really? Or does it sound like someone who has stopped wasting energy fighting reality and has started using that energy to respond excellently? He stood up, steadying himself. The Stoics did not teach passive acceptance. They taught active engagement with what is, rather than anger at what is not. But how does ancient philosophy help with modern problems? Problems change the decor, not the architecture. Zeno faced shipwrecks and bankruptcy. You face divorce and office politics. The fear is identical. Loss hurts the same. Anger burns at the same temperature. He pulled out one last book. Here, Chrysippus, the third head of the Stoic school. He wrote over 700 books, though most have been lost. He said that emotions are not things that happen to us, but judgments we make, quickly and habitually, but judgments nonetheless. Are you saying that I choose to feel anxiety? I'm saying that you interpret situations as threatening, and anxiety follows that interpretation. Change the frame. He left the sentence unfinished. I looked at the books scattered across the table. Where do I start? Where Zeno started, with the rubble, with the questions, with the decision that wisdom is more important than comfort. She headed for the door and paused. The Stoics built their philosophy like builders build houses. First, the foundation. The foundation is this. Some things depend on us, others do not. Learn the difference. Live accordingly. Everything else is commentary. The library fell silent after she left. I sat surrounded by 2,000 years of voices, all saying variations on the same thing. You can't control the storm, but you can learn to navigate it. I found myself returning to the library the following night, drawn by questions I couldn't articulate. The old woman was sitting in the same place, but this time she had a long bow resting on the table, an incongruous image among the philosophy texts. You're back? It wasn't a question. I couldn't stop thinking about the circle, about control. She raised the bow and traced its curve with her weathered fingers. Good. Then you're ready for the archer. She pointed to the chair. The Stoics loved this metaphor. Cleanthes used it. So did Cicero when he explained Stoic thought to the Romans. Why an archer? Watch. He stood up, placed an invisible arrow in the bow, and drew the string back. His stance was surprisingly steady. What belongs to the archer at this moment? I studied his posture, the stance, the grip, the force with which he pulls. His breathing, he added, his concentration, his decision of when to release. And the target, I suppose. Exactly. The archer is master of the preparation, the form, the intention. He maintained his shooting position. But once the arrow is flying, it is subject to the wind, to distance. Perhaps the target will move. Or the string breaks, or someone pushes your elbow, or a bird crosses the trajectory. He lowered the bow. The archer who gets angry when the arrow misses suffers twice, once for the missed shot and once for the anger. The archer who shrugs and draws another arrow suffers once, or not at all if he really understands. He took out a worn volume and opened a marked page. Marcus Aurelius wrote this while campaigning on the Danube frontier. Translated, "Limit yourself to the present." He is watching his soldiers train with bows. Some curse when they miss. Others simply adjust and shoot again. He drew an archer on a piece of paper and drew a dotted line from the bow to the target. Everything along this line after the release is life. Gusts of wind, unexpected movements, simple physics. The amateur archer tries to control the uncontrollable through worry, anger, magical thinking. And the professional, he goes back to what belongs to him. The stance, can I improve it? The breathing, did I rush? The shot, was it clean? He studies the result without becoming the result. I thought about yesterday's meeting where they rejected my proposal. The hours I spent afterward analyzing every word, imagining different outcomes. But how can you not care about the results? Who said I don't care? I sounded harsh. The archer cares a lot about hitting the target. That's why he practices. That's why he aims. But caring and clinging are very different things. One gives energy, the other exhausts. She took out another book, this one in Latin. Seneca, exiled by Claudius, summoned by Nero, finally forced to commit suicide. He wrote, "Everything new excites the mind, but a mind that seeks the truth turns away from the new and seeks the old truths." He meant that wisdom does not consist in discovering new principles, but in understanding the eternal ones. Like the archer. Like the archer. Watch any Olympic archer. They have routines, pre-shot rituals. It's not superstition, it's a process. They return to what they control because it's the only thing they've ever controlled. She mimicked the gesture of drawing a bow. Breathe in, focus, aim, choose your target. Tense, commit your effort. Release, then let go completely. Sounds like meditation. It is active meditation. The Stoics weren't monks who fled the world. They were senators, soldiers, merchants. They needed a philosophy that worked in the forum, on the battlefield, in the marketplace. She tapped the sketch. This isn't about archery, it's about every moment of your life. I picked up the drawing. So, when my ex-wife sends me angry emails, you're the archer. Her words are the wind. You can't control the wind, but you can control whether you respond immediately or wait, whether you respond with anger or with measured words, whether you respond or don't respond. But what if... Stop. She raised a hand. What ifs are the curse of amateurs. What if the wind changes? What if the audience laughs? What if I fail? Professionals ask themselves other questions. What is it? What is mine? What's next? He showed me another passage, this one from Epictetus. When I see an anxious person, I ask them, "What do you want?" Because if they didn't want what is not in their power, how could they be anxious? Are you saying that anxiety comes from wanting to control the uncontrollable? Always. Try it yourself. The next time you feel anxiety creeping in, ask yourself, am I trying to control something that is outside my circle? Am I trying to be the goalkeeper and the wind at the same time? I thought about the constant knot in my stomach. My daughter's grades. Could I control her studies? My boss's opinion. Could I control his thoughts? The impact of the economy on my investments. Could I control market forces? The answer is always no, right? To control directly, yes, but influence? That's different. He drew arrows from the archer to various points. You can't control your daughter's grades, but you can offer her help, create a space for her to study, set an example of discipline. You can't control your boss's thoughts, but you can do excellent work, communicate clearly, and maintain professionalism. The flight of the arrow, no, the quality of your shot, always. It sounds exhausting, this constant vigilance. At first, like learning the right way to shoot, which is uncomfortable at first, but over time it becomes natural. The Stoics called it prosoche, continuous attention. It's not anxious vigilance, but a calm awareness, like an experienced archer who no longer thinks about each component, but simply shoots. He stood up, bow on his shoulder. Mental toughness isn't about becoming invulnerable, it's about being precise. Precise about what deserves your energy, precise about where your power ends and physics begins, precise about the difference between intention and result. What if you miss the target? Then you've gained information about wind patterns, about your form, about the tension of the bow. Failure without anger becomes learning. He headed for the door, then turned back. The Stoics knew something we've forgotten. Elegance is not weakness. Accepting results with elegance is not giving up. It's giving up the illusion that you're responsible for managing the universe. The library seemed different after she left. Less a repository of ancient ideas and more an arsenal of practical tools. I picked up the archer's sketch and studied the dotted line between the bow and the target, all that space where life happens, all that distance I had been trying to control with worry, with anger, with endless what-ifs. The rain started 3 days after the meeting at the library. It wasn't a gentle rain that waters the gardens, but a relentless rain that finds every weak spot in the roof. I sat in my apartment, watching the water drip incessantly into a pot I had placed under the leak. My phone vibrated. Another message from my brother. "Dad is getting worse. When are you coming?" I looked at the message and felt the family invasion begin. Guilt seeped through the cracks like rain through the roof. Then shame for feeling guilty. Then anger at the shame. Each emotion arrived uninvited and settled in my head. The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had lent me philosophy books months ago. She was standing there, somehow dry despite the downpour, with what looked like a toolbox in her hands. "Your roof," she said when I opened the door. "I can hear the dripping through the walls." "It's okay. I have a pot." Pots collect water. They don't fix leaks. She walked past me without being invited and examined the ceiling with expert eyes. "You've been reading the Stoics." It wasn't a question. He'd seen the books on my coffee table. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, with the sketch of the archer still serving as a bookmark. "I'm trying," I admitted. He opened the toolbox and took out some tools. There's a concept Marcus Aurelius loved. The inner citadel. Do you know it? Vaguely. Your mind is a fortress. He climbed onto a chair and began working on the leak. But most people live with their doors wide open. Every criticism, every piece of bad news, every random fear. They all come in, set up camp and throw a party. It's hard to keep them out. It's not about keeping them out. It's about choosing. He applied the sealant with precise movements. A fortress has guards, not to fight all visitors, but to ask them questions. Is this thought true? Is it useful? Does it help me live according to my values? My phone vibrated again. Another message from my brother, this time with a photo of my father in his hospital bed. Guilt washed over me, but this time I felt it coming, like when you see someone walking up your driveway. "You've done it," Mrs. Chen said without looking up. "That pause, that moment of recognition, that's the gatekeeper." I still feel guilty. Feeling is not accepting. Emotion has knocked on the door. You don't have to let it in. She bent down and examined her work. Marcus wrote his meditations during plague, war, and betrayal. His own son was plotting against him. Do you think external pressures are something new? He took a worn notebook from his toolbox and opened a marked page. Here, Book 8. Limit yourself to the present. He's not saying to ignore the past or the future. He's saying, don't let them colonize your present. My father is dying. Yes. So? Her bluntness caught me off guard. And I should be there. Should you? According to whom? Your brother? Society? Your guilt? She sat down, uninvited but welcome. Or according to your considered judgment of what is right? I don't know anymore. Then that's where you need to start. Not with the answer, but with an honest assessment. She drew a circle on a piece of paper. This is your mind, your inner strength. Now, what is trying to get in? I made a list. Guilt over my father, anger over my brother's pressure, fear of work deadlines, anxiety about money, shame over the divorce. Good. Now, which of those deserve to come in? He raised a hand before I could answer. Not which ones are the loudest. Not which ones have been camped out there the longest. Which ones actually help you act with wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Concern for my father, maybe, but not guilt. Exactly. Concern motivates right action. Guilt just eats away at you. He drew arrows pointing to the circle. Every day, hundreds of thoughts assault your fortress. The news, social media, other people's opinions, your own mental habits. Most people just let them in and then wonder why their inner life seems like chaos. The leak had stopped dripping. The sudden silence seemed significant. But how do you actually do it? Do you block things out? I don't block them out. I process them. He pulled another book out of his bag. He seemed to carry philosophy around with him, like other people carry their phones. Epictetus, an ancient slave who understood mental freedom better than anyone. He said that external impressions are like stamps trying to print themselves on wax. You can choose to stand firm or let them leave their mark. That sounds like denial. Is researching a visitor before opening the door denial, or is letting everyone in without asking negligence? He stood up and put away his tools. Your brother's messages are information. Your father's condition is worsening, that's all. The guilt, the pressure, the you should, those are additions, interpretations, invaders disguised as facts. My phone vibrated again. This time, instead of reading it immediately, I felt the need to wait. The attraction, the habit of responding instantly. Strength needs daily maintenance, said Mrs. Chen, watching me. Every morning, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Today I will encounter interference, ingratitude, insolence." He wasn't pessimistic. He was preparing his defenses. That sounds exhausting. More exhausting than being invaded on a daily basis? That your peace depends on every passing comment, every breaking news alert, every comparison on social media? She headed for the door. Discipline is work. Chaos is exhaustion. After she left, I sat there in silence. Outside it was still raining, but inside everything was dry. I thought of my mind as a fortress, of the crowds I had let in without question. The storm came 3 days after Mrs. Chen fixed my roof. It wasn't a metaphor, but a Pacific cyclone that knocked out power to half the neighborhood and threw a eucalyptus tree against my garage door. I stood in the rain, staring at the trunk sticking out of the splintered wood like a giant spear. My car was underneath, its windshield a web of cracks. The insurance papers I needed were in the glove compartment, out of reach. "Beautiful," said a voice behind me. I turned and saw Mrs. Chen in a yellow raincoat, studying the damage with what looked like genuine appreciation. "Beautiful. My car is wrecked. My garage is destroyed." "Yes, and look how perfectly the tree fell. 6 inches to the left, and it would have torn through the gas line. 6 inches to the right, and it would have hit the bedroom." She stepped closer and ran her hand along the bark. "The storm gave you exactly what you could handle." "The storm left me a mess." "The storm gave it time. You're giving it a story." She pulled a tarp out of nowhere, like a magician from the hardware store. "Help me cover this before it rains more." We worked in silence, holding the blue plastic against the wind. My neighbor across the street was yelling at someone on the phone, probably his insurance company. Another neighbor sat on her porch, crying about her flooded basement. "You know what sailors call this?" Mrs. Chen asked, pointing at the mess. "Tuesday. Sailors hope for storms. Sailors accept storms. It's a completely different thing." She tied a corner with expert knots. "My grandfather was a merchant seaman, 40 years at sea. Do you know what he used to tell me about storms?" I shook my head, rain falling down my face. "He said amateurs curse the wind, professionals adjust the sails, masters dance with it." "Dancing seems optimistic when you have a tree through your garage." "Amor fati," she said, pronouncing it like a prayer. "Love of fate. Not resignation, but collaboration." We finished with the tarp and retreated to the porch of my house. The power was still out, but I had a camping lantern that cast strange shadows. "Marcus Aurelius lost 14 children," said Mrs. Chen, wringing out her raincoat. "The plague took them, one by one. Do you know what he wrote? What stands in the way becomes the way." That's crazy. Is it? Or is it crazy to fight reality? She accepted the towel I offered her. The tree fell. That's a fact, not a disaster. Now you have a choice. Fight what happened or work with it. Work with a destroyed garage? Why not? Insurance will cover it. You'll get a better door. Maybe you can add those windows you mentioned you wanted. The tree has given you a renovation without the guilt of choosing it. My phone, miraculously still charged, lit up with a message from my brother. "Dad's asking about you. Last chance to not be selfish." Familiar anger rose, but behind it was something else. A strange curiosity to see what would happen if I didn't fight it. "That's a storm too," Mrs. Chen observed, nodding toward my phone. your brother's trial, your father's condition, the family dynamics. You can rage against those winds or adjust your sails. Adjusting is like giving up. Does a sailor give up when he works with the wind instead of against it? Or does he get to his destination faster? She took a thermos out of her bag. Of course, she had hot tea ready. Epictetus was a slave. He was literally someone's property. Do you think he had control over his circumstances? No. But he had control over his relationship to those circumstances. He said we are actors in a play. We don't choose the role, slave, emperor, son of a dying father, but we choose how to play it. The rain picked up, pounding against the porch roof. Across the street, my neighbor, who was yelling, had thrown his phone into the yard. "He's fighting against time," Mrs. Chen said. "And how's he doing?" "About as well as I'm doing fighting my brother." "Then stop fighting. Don't give up. Stop fighting. There's a difference." She poured tea into the lid of the thermos and handed it to me. A good sailor reads the storm, finds its patterns, and uses its strength. Does your brother make you feel guilty? That's the wind. Is your father dying? That's the current. You can't change either of those things, but you can navigate. Navigate where? Towards who you choose to be in these conditions. The storm doesn't make the sailor. The storm reveals the sailor. I got a message from work. The presentation I had prepared for tomorrow had been cancelled due to a power outage. 3 weeks of work lost. "Another gift," said Mrs. Chen, reading my face. "A gift? What were you going to do with that sudden day off? Panic or change course?" She stood up and looked at the storm. Every obstacle is an invitation to develop a quality: patience, creativity, courage, acceptance. The Stoics called it the testing ground of character. That sounds like toxic positivity. Positivity says everything is good. Amor fati says everything is viable. He pointed to the tree in my garage. That's not good, but it's there. It's real. It's yours, and you can work with it. Fighting that fact is like a sailor shaking his fist at the clouds. The light flickered for a moment and then went out again. In that brief moment, I saw my garage destroyed in a different way. It wasn't a disaster, but a fact, a new situation to deal with. "My grandfather survived 3 shipwrecks," Mrs. Chen said, getting ready to leave. After the 3rd one, they asked him if he was afraid to sail again. Do you know what he said? I waited. He said the sea didn't care about my fear, that it was going to be what it was going to be. My job was to be a better sailor than I was the day before. She stepped out into the rain and turned back. "Your father is dying. Your brother is angry. Nature has redecorated your garage. These are your current sailing conditions. The question isn't why. The question is, with these winds, where do you want to sail?" After Mrs. Chen left, I sat in the dark with her words echoing in my head like coins in a jar. The camping lantern cast my shadow against the wall, distorted, larger than life, changing with every flicker. My phone vibrated again. This time it was my sister. "Mom says you're being stubborn. Dad doesn't have much time left. Whatever happened between you two, let it go." Let it go. As if 7 years of silence were a coat I could just take off like that. The rain had eased and was now falling in a steady patter. I grabbed the flashlight and walked toward the garage, stepping over broken branches. The oak trunk had gone through the roof like a fist through paper, but in the light of the flashlight, something caught my eye. My old telescope, which had somehow remained intact on its shelf, now exposed to the night sky through the huge hole. I laughed. I really did. There was thousands of dollars worth of damage, and the universe had built me a skylight. What an interesting perspective. I jumped. Mrs. Chen was at the door, soaked again. I forgot the thermos, she explained, but made no move to retrieve it. You're doing it. Doing what? Turning the lens. She pointed to the telescope. Same garage, same tree, same damage. But you just found a different angle. It's still wrecked. Yes, and? The question hung in the air. And, not but, and. Marcus Aurelius had a habit, she continued, stepping carefully around the debris. When something happened, a plague, a betrayal, a loss, he wrote it down. Then he rewrote it, differently, objectively, without emotion. He picked up a piece of broken wood. First draft. A storm destroyed my neighbor's garage. Second draft. Weather conditions caused a tree to fall. Same event, but seen from a different perspective. It sounds like denial. Or precision. Which description makes you stronger? Which one suggests action rather than paralysis? My phone lit up with an email from the insurance company. Claim denied. They said the tree had previous damage. Negligence in maintenance. I felt the usual heat rising in my chest. I could feel the story forming. They're screwing me over. It's always the same. Nothing ever goes right. First draft? Asked Miss Chen, reading my face. Insurance companies are thieves. Second draft? I forced myself to think. The claim was denied based on their evaluation criteria. Which version makes you the victim? The first one. Which one leaves you room to respond? Then I saw it. How the story I was telling about the events became the cage or the key. Your father, she said gently. What's the first draft of that story? The words came out automatically. He chose his career over his family. He was never there. He made me feel like a failure. The second draft. This was harder, much harder. A man prioritized work. His son wanted more connection. They struggled to understand each other. Which story keeps you stuck? The first one. Which one allows you to move forward? The flashlight flickered, casting new shadows. In its unstable light, everything seemed different every moment. The same objects became mysterious, then familiar, then strange again. The Stoics had another practice, said Mrs. Chen, settling into an upturned bucket. They imagined losing everything, wealth, health, reputation, not out of morbid curiosity, but to recognize that even stripped of everything, they would still have the ability to choose their perspective. Sounds depressing. Or liberating. If you can maintain equanimity while imagining the worst, think how powerful you become when faced with the merely difficult. A message appeared from an unknown number. I'm your father's hospice nurse. He's asking specifically for you. He says he has something to tell you. The story immediately began to form. He wants to criticize me one last time. He'll list my failures. He'll compare me to my brother. I stopped. I turned the lens away. Second draft. A dying man wants to talk to his son. Just that. No projections, no assumptions, no 40 years of baggage. Do you know what's funny about telescopes? Asked Mrs. Chen, standing up. They don't actually bring distant things closer. They collect light. They collect photons that were already traveling toward us and concentrate them. The star doesn't move. What changes is your perception of it. She walked over to the hole in the ceiling and looked up at the clear sky. Your father is who he is. Your brother, your wrecked garage, your denied claim. They're all photons already traveling toward you. You can't change their trajectory. but you can change the way you collect that light. So I should just accept everything? Accept that it's raining? Yes. Stay out there getting soaked? No. He pulled the thermos out from behind a paint can. Acceptance isn't passivity, it's clarity. You see things as they are, not as you'd like them to be, which means you can respond to reality instead of your fantasy about reality. The email from the insurance company stared back at me. Denied. A fact. It wasn't a judgment about me, nor was it proof of cosmic injustice. Just data. What would an experienced sailor do with this information? Mrs. Chen asked. I'd look for another route. Exactly. But first I'd stop cursing the wind. She headed for the door and paused. Your father is dying. You're angry with him. Both are true. Both are facts. The question is, which perspective makes you stronger? The one that keeps you at home protecting your resentment, or the one that takes you to his side to hear what he has to say to you? The next morning arrived at 4:47 a.m. Not because the alarm went off, since I still had no power. My body woke up on its own, as if an internal mechanism clicked like a wind-up toy when it reached its mark. Mrs. Chen was already at my front door, doing what looked like Tai Chi next to the fallen oak tree. Slow, deliberate movements. Each gesture was completed before the next one began. Couldn't you sleep? I asked, adjusting my robe to protect myself from the early morning chill. I've been awake since 4. She didn't break her rhythm. Same time for 37 years. Even on weekends? Especially on weekends. That's when discipline really counts, when no one is watching you and nothing is forcing you to do it. I watched her complete another sequence. Push, pull, turn, breathe. No rush, no skipping anything. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations in a tent, she said, finally stopping. On campaign, at war, surrounded by death and decisions that would affect millions of people. Yet he made time every morning to write, not to publish, but to practice. Practice what? Being Marcus Aurelius. The person he chose to be didn't automatically exist. He had to build him every morning, word by word. He walked over to the pile of debris in my garage and began sorting the wood into neat piles, usable, firewood, trash. You know what most people get wrong about mental toughness? They think it's about the big moments, the response to a crisis, the heroic stance. Isn't that right? Tuesday at 5 a.m., when your bed is warm and the gym is cold, that's where strength lies. The email you respond to professionally when you feel like responding angrily. The healthy meal when it would be easier to eat fast food. The small weights lifted repeatedly. I found myself helping her sort wood. The repetitive motion was strangely relaxing. Epictetus was a slave, she continued. He couldn't control his freedom, his work, or even his own body. His master broke his leg and left him lame for life. But he could control his morning routine. Get up, wash, reflect, prepare, every day. That routine became his sovereignty. It seems insignificant compared to slavery. Or maybe it was the only thing that kept him from being truly a slave. His body was owned by another. His morning ritual was his own. My phone vibrated. A message from my brother. Dad is getting worse. It's time to make a decision. Family anxiety took hold of me, but instead of responding immediately or avoiding it, I put my phone down. I continued sorting the wood. The Stoics had a term for it, said Mrs. Chen, discipline of action. It's not about dramatic actions, but everyday actions. They believed that character was like a muscle. It's not built with a single heroic lift. It's built with thousands of ordinary repetitions. She took out a small notebook, worn and threadbare. Every morning, I write 3 things: what I'm grateful for, what I'm going to focus on today, and what I'm going to let go of. I've been doing this since my husband died. Does it help? The first day? No. The 30th? A little. The day... She paused, calculating. 13,505. I can't imagine starting a day without doing it. The sun was rising over the horizon, painting the destruction gold. In that light, the fallen tree looked less like rubble and more like a sculpture. You mentioned that your father was very strict with you about consistency, she said. He always criticized your perseverance. He was right. I started things. Guitar, martial arts, languages. I never stuck with anything beyond the initial excitement. So, you proved him right by quitting. That hurt because it was true. This is what I've learned in 37 years of getting up at 4 in the morning, he said, standing up and brushing the dust off his hands. Motivation is a tourist. Discipline is a resident. You can't build a life on tourist visits. He walked to his car and returned with a simple kitchen timer. Start with something stupidly small, so small you can't fail. Set it for 5 minutes every morning. Sit down, breathe. Think of one thing you're going to do that day that's in line with who you want to be. Not who you are, but who you're building. 5 minutes? 5 minutes. But every day, no exceptions, no negotiations. Is your father in a hospice? 5 minutes. No electricity? 5 minutes. Did you win the lottery? 5 minutes. It sounds too simple. Simple isn't easy. Ask anyone who's tried to meditate for 5 minutes straight. He handed me the timer. It's not the 5 minutes that matters. It's the promise you make to yourself. It's proof that you can trust yourself to do what you say you'll do. I turned the timer between my hands. It was so small. Seneca took cold baths, he added. Not because Rome lacked hot water. He was rich and could afford luxuries. He chose discomfort, a little discomfort every day, voluntarily. He said it prepared him for involuntary discomfort. Are you suggesting I take cold showers? I'm suggesting you stop waiting for strength to come and start building it little by little. A 5-minute timer, a cold shower, thank you emails, push-ups, whatever you choose it every day. My brother sent me another message. Hello? Are you there? This time I picked up the phone. I'll be there tomorrow, I typed. Then I deleted it. I started again. I need today to get a few things organized. I'll be there tomorrow morning. See, said Mrs. Chen, returning to her Tai Chi spot. You just lifted a small weight, committing to a deadline instead of avoiding it or making an excuse. Tomorrow, you'll lift another one. You'll show up. The day after that, another one. You'll be present even if it's hard. Mrs. Chen paused mid-movement, her arms frozen in an elegant arc. Before you go see your father, there's something else you should know. Something the Stoics called premeditatio malorum. That sounds sinister. It means premeditation of evils. Although evils is a dramatic translation, think of it more as rehearsing reality. She completed the movement, slow as honey. Every morning, after my gratitude practice, I spend 3 minutes imagining what could go wrong that day. It's not being a catastrophist, it's being prepared. That seems contrary to positive thinking. Positive thinking says to ignore the iceberg. The Stoics said to study it, map it, and plan your route around it. She moved on to another pose. When my husband was diagnosed, I had already imagined it 20 times. Not because I wanted to, but because life had taught me that avoiding thoughts doesn't avoid reality. I thought about the next day. The hospice, Dad's room, the machines, the smell of antiseptic mixed with something else, something harder to define. "Try it now," she said. "Close your eyes. Go through tomorrow in your mind." I resisted, but her steady gaze was not judgmental, only patient. I closed my eyes. "Start with the drive," she instructed. "The parking lot, the entrance." In my mind, I saw the entrance to the hospice, the glass doors that opened with a hiss, the receptionist speaking in that soft, rehearsed tone reserved for places where people go to say goodbye. Now the hallway. The fluorescent lights. That particular silence of hospices, not peaceful, but suspended. Other rooms with other families having other final conversations. His room. Dad, smaller than I remembered. The morphine drip. His hands, once strong enough to rebuild an engine, now thin, almost translucent. My brother was already there, exhausted, probably angry that he hadn't arrived sooner. What's the worst moment you can imagine? That he wouldn't recognize me, or worse, that he would recognize me and be disappointed. Again. Hold on to that image. Don't run away from it. What would you do? I forced myself to stay in the imagined scene. Dad's eyes, cloudy but still capable of expressing that characteristic disdain he had perfected. My brother's accusing gaze. The weight of all the unfinished conversations, all the vacations avoided, all the excuses I had made. I would sit down anyway, I heard myself say. I would pull up a chair. Maybe I would just be there, even if he didn't want me to be there. Fine. What else could go wrong? I could die while I'm there, or just before I get there. Or I could be in agony for weeks and I'd have to decide whether to stay or go back to my life. Imagine every scenario, not to torture yourself, but to prepare yourself. So I did. I imagined arriving and finding his bed empty, clean, waiting for the next occupant. I imagined holding his hand as he passed away. I imagined the uncomfortable vigil, the days stretching into weeks, my life on hold, resentment growing alongside the pain. The Stoics did this every morning, said Mrs. Chen. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, woke up and reminded himself that on that day he would encounter interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. Not because he was pessimistic, but because he was realistic. Sounds exhausting. On the contrary, actually. When you've mentally rehearsed the difficult conversation, the real conversation loses its terror. When you've imagined the loss, the actual loss doesn't take you by surprise. She continued with her exercises while I sat with my discomfort. The timer she had given me reflected the morning light. Seneca practiced poverty, she continued. He spent days sleeping on the floor, eating simple food, wearing rough clothes, not as punishment, but as a vaccine. He asked himself, is this the condition I feared so much? But you can't really prepare for death, not truly. No, but you can prepare for your reaction to death. There's a difference. She paused and looked at me directly. When I imagined my husband's death, which I did many times during his illness, I also imagined myself afterwards, getting up, making breakfast, feeding the cat, going to work, not thriving, just continuing. Did that help when it actually happened? The pain was still like drowning, but I had imagined drowning, so I knew I had to look for the surface. I had rehearsed the movements to swim even when I couldn't feel my limbs. My phone rang. It was my brother. "Don't answer it yet," said Mrs. Chen. "First, imagine the worst news she could give you. Imagine yourself receiving it. Imagine your response." I let it ring. I imagined my brother's voice. "She's dead." I imagined my response, calm, controlled, asking about the arrangements. I imagined the guilt I would feel afterward for avoiding his call. The phone stopped ringing. Then it rang again. This time I answered. "He's asking for you," my brother said. He wasn't angry, just tired. "He's lucid this morning. The doctors say this could be his last chance." "I'll be there in less than an hour." "Really?" "Really?" After I hung up, Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "You did it. You imagined the scenarios and acted anyway. That's premeditatio malorum, not avoiding action, but making it possible." I'm still terrified. Of course, practice doesn't eliminate fear. It tames it. It makes it familiar instead of strange. He took out his notebook again, wrote something down, and tore out the page. A quote from Seneca for the trip. I read it. "What is totally unexpected has a more devastating effect, and the unexpected increases the weight of a disaster. This is a reason to make sure that nothing takes us by surprise." "Pack your bags tonight," she advised me. "Imagine the conversation going badly. Imagine it going well. Imagine the silence. Imagine the tears. Imagine the laughter. Go through all those moments. Then, tomorrow, whatever happens, it will seem like a road you've already traveled, only with a different light." The trip to Dad's hospital took 6 hours. I had kept Seneca's quote in my jacket pocket, but after about 3 hours, I stopped at a rest area and called Mrs. Chen. "I can't stop thinking about what you said, about preparation, but I don't know what values to hold on to when I get there." "How timely," she said. There were noises coming from the kitchen, the telltale sounds of breakfast being prepared. The Stoics gave us 4 stones to build on, 4 virtues that don't crumble. A philosophy lesson at 110 kilometers per hour? Where better? You're literally cruising. Let me tell you about my first test of courage. Cars sped past my parked sedan. Families hurried to the restrooms. Normal life went on. I was 23 and working in a textile factory. The plant manager, Mr. Huang, was stealing wages. Everyone knew it. No one said anything. One day, I saw him deducting pay from a pregnant woman for going to the bathroom. She needed that money to buy prenatal vitamins. "Did you report him?" "First, I documented everything. Then I told him I knew. I gave him a chance to fix it." He paused. "He fired me on the spot, but I had already sent copies to his supervisor." "Is that courage?" "Courage is not shaking. I shook for days. Courage is doing the right thing despite the shaking. The Stoics called it the virtue that makes all other virtues possible. Without courage, wisdom remains theory, justice remains silent, and temperance becomes mere timidity." I watched a truck driver help an elderly woman with her walker, holding her steady so she wouldn't fall in the wind. "But how do you know what's right?" "That's where wisdom comes in. The 4th stone." His voice had that particular clarity that comes from years of testing ideas against reality. Wisdom is not intelligence. Many intelligent people make stupid decisions. Wisdom is seeing clearly, stripping away ego, emotions, and assumptions to find what is really true. That sounds impossible. It's a practice, not perfection. When I confronted Mr. Huang, Wisdom meant gathering evidence first, not acting out of anger. It meant knowing the difference between what would satisfy me, public humiliation, and what would actually help, systemic change. A father walked by, carrying a small child who was screaming. His face was calm, almost meditative. Another form of courage, I thought. And the other two stones? Temperance and justice. They are companions. Now he was cutting something with a steady, rehearsed rhythm. Temperance is not denial, it is proportion. Not too much, not too little. The right amount of anger to spur action without clouding judgment. The right amount of pain to honor loss without drowning in it. And justice? Justice is temperance directed outward, using your strength to serve something beyond yourself. The pregnant woman in the factory. Justice demanded that I act, even though the injustice did not affect me directly. I thought of Dad, of all the times his lack of temperance, with alcohol, with anger, with disappointment, had shaped the structure of our family. He never had those virtues, I said. Maybe not, but you're not going there to judge his virtues. You're going to practice yours. How? Courage, showing up despite your fear. Wisdom, seeing him as he is, not as you'd like him to be. Temperance, giving what you can without exhausting yourself. Justice, honoring your obligation as a son while maintaining your boundaries as a person. A message from my brother. He's sleeping. He's still stable. I can't stop thinking, I said to Mrs. Chen, about how these virtues could have changed things. If he had had temperance with his drinking, if I had had the courage to stand up to him before. Careful. That road leads nowhere. Virtues only work in the present. How does courage manifest itself today? What does wisdom whisper to you now? Wisdom says, get back on the road. And temperance says, stop for coffee first. A real breakfast, not gas station junk. She laughed, that particular laugh of recognition. Good. Virtues aren't there to make you a martyr. They're there to make you effective. Inside the service area, I ordered eggs and toast, simple fuel. At the next table, a mother was dealing cards to 3 children, turning nervousness into a game. Small justice, creating order out of chaos. One more thing, Mrs. Chen said before hanging up. Virtues complement each other. Courage gives space to wisdom. Wisdom informs justice. Justice requires temperance. Temperance allows courage. They are not separate achievements. They are a single practice with 4 sides. Like a compass? Exactly. And unlike most of the things we pursue, money, status, approval, virtues travel. They work in hospitals and boardrooms, in conflict and in tranquility. They are the only truly portable wealth. After breakfast, I sat in the car for 5 more minutes. I took out my phone and wrote a note to myself. Courage, walk through the hospital door. Wisdom, listen more than you speak. Temperance, one conversation at a time. Justice, be the son you are capable of being, not the one he expected. 3 hours to go. 3 hours to practice holding the 4 stones firmly, feeling their weight, learning to balance them. The highway stretched out before me, straight and safe. I merged into traffic, carrying with me my inheritance, not my father's, but that of thinkers who had died 2,000 years ago and who, somehow, knew exactly what I would need today. The hospital parking lot smelled of exhaust fumes and disinfectant. I sat in the car with the engine off, watching people move between the different levels, each carrying their own invisible weight. My phone vibrated. It was Mrs. Chen again. "Are you still in the car?" How did you know? Because I know you're going over the virtues as if they were instructions for assembling furniture. They're not. They're more like muscles. You've been using them your whole life, but not consciously. A woman walked past my car, her shoulders straight, despite the IV stand she was pushing, courage on aluminum and wheels. "Tell me about a time when you were brave without knowing it," Mrs. Chen said. "I can't." "In 3rd grade, your teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, the boy who stuttered." The memory surfaced like something rising from the depths of the water. Timothy Marsh. The kids were making fun of the way he talked during his presentation on dinosaurs. I got up, walked to the front, and stood next to him. I didn't say anything. I just stood there until he was done. "That wasn't bravery. You were terrified." "That's precisely what made it bravery. The Stoics never said that bravery was the absence of fear. It's acting correctly in the presence of fear. Your legs were shaking, but you stood your ground anyway." Through the windshield, I saw an old man helping his wife out of the car. His hands were shaking from age or emotion. It was impossible to tell, but his grip remained firm. "Wisdom is different," Mrs. Chen continued. "It's the virtue that tells you when to use the others. Remember when you didn't report your roommate for cheating? That wasn't wisdom. That was cowardice." "Really? You knew he had 3 younger siblings to support. You knew that reporting him would ruin his scholarship and destroy his family's future. You also knew that he never cheated again after you confronted him in private. Wisdom sometimes looks like inaction, but it's actually a precise calculation, weighing immediate justice against long-term good." "My brother sent me a message. Dad's awake. He's asking for you." "I have to go in." "Wait, we haven't talked about temperance. Self-control. I get it." "No, you don't." His voice sharpened, like a teacher talking to a student. "Temperance isn't about denying yourself. It's about proportion. The right amount, the right time, the right reason. Do you know what killed my marriage? It wasn't my ex-husband's drinking, it was his total abstinence. That stopped me." "What?" "He went from being an alcoholic to a fanatic. There was no middle ground. He traded one extreme for another. Temperance would have been learning to have a beer with friends. Instead, he became rigid and critical. The opposite of excess is not absence, it's balance." I thought about my own habits. Coffee until my hands shook. Work until my eyes burned. Exercise until I injured myself. Always oscillating between excess and nothingness. "The ancients compared temperance to a musician tuning his strings," he continued. "If they're too tight, they break. If they're too loose, there's no music. Virtue is finding the tension that creates harmony." "And justice?" "It's already underway. You're driving to see a man who never drove to see you. That's justice. Giving what is due, regardless of what is owed to you." A family came out of the stairwell. 2 parents and 3 children, all with the glassy eyes of people who have been in a hospital for a long time. The father was carrying the youngest, about 4 years old, her head heavy on his shoulder. The mother guided the 2 older children, her hand light but steady on their backs. Justice in its smallest and most essential form. The strong supporting the weak, expecting nothing in return. "But this is what most people don't see," said Mrs. Chen. "Virtues are not separate. Look at the work of a paramedic, the courage to face danger, the wisdom to assess quickly, the temperance to remain calm under pressure, the justice in treating all patients equally. Virtues are intertwined. They are one thing with 4 expressions." "Like water," I said, surprising myself. Ice, liquid, steam, clouds, the same substance, different forms. Now you think like a Stoic. My father's room was on the 7th floor. The elevator filled up with the afternoon shift. Nurses, technicians, a chaplain. I studied their faces. Tired, but focused. They wore virtues like work clothes. Functional, simple, necessary. "I'm scared," I confessed to Mrs. Chen as we climbed the floors. "Good. Courage needs fear to propel it forward. Otherwise it's just confidence, and confidence breaks as soon as it encounters real resistance." The elevator doors opened. The hallway stretched out long and overly lit, with that fluorescent hospital light that makes everyone look a little sick. Room 714. I could see my brother through the door, with his back to me, leaning over the bed. "Remember," Mrs. Chen said, "virtues are not performances. They are practices. You don't have to be perfectly brave or perfectly wise. You just have to choose the next right action, then the next, and then the next." Like steps. Exactly. One by one, and suddenly you'll have crossed the distance. My brother turned and saw me. His face changed, relief mingled with something else, perhaps exhaustion, or his own kind of bravery from standing guard alone. "I'm going in," I told Mrs. Chen. "I know. Virtues are with you. They always have been." The hospital room smelled of industrial disinfectant and something else. That particular smell of recycled air and worry. My father looked smaller than I remembered, the tubes and wires making him look more like a machine than a man. His eyes rested on me, alert despite the drip of morphine. "You came." It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. "Of course." My brother took a step back, leaving space. "I'll get some coffee." Alone with my father, I felt the weight of the years we hadn't spoken. The chair next to his bed was still warm from my brother's vigil. I sat down, not knowing what duty demanded at that moment. Words, silence, forgiveness? His hand moved slightly on the blanket. He wasn't trying to reach anything, he was just restless. Your mother would have known what to say. She always knew. That was her gift. Mine was going to work. A cough, shallow and careful. 43 years in the factory. He never missed a day, except when you were born, and when he died. I thought of those decades of morning shifts, lunchboxes and time cards. The Stoics would have called it kathekon, appropriate action, duty befitting one's role. He had been a provider, reliable as the sunrise, asking for nothing more than the next shift. The doctor says you need an operation. Thursday. They're optimistic. He studied the ceiling tiles. Your brother's been here since Tuesday. I know. He's always been the good son. The old wound, as natural as breathing. But sitting there, watching him diminish before the hospital machinery, I understood something Mrs. Chen had said about justice. Giving what is due, regardless of what you get in return. He learned that from you, being there, staying when things get tough. My father's eyes rested on me, surprised. Through the window, the afternoon light illuminated the skeleton of the city. Cranes and scaffolding, constant reconstruction. Workers moved across beams and platforms, each focused on their task. No one looked up, no one applauded. Only duty expressed through action. I wasn't a good father, he said. You were the father you knew how to be. That's an excuse. No, it's a fact. We all work with the tools we're given. My phone vibrated. An email from work, marked urgent, demanding an immediate response. 3 months ago, I would have left, responded immediately, and used it as an escape. Now, however, I turned my phone away. My duty here was more important than my duty there, and wisdom lay in knowing how to distinguish between the two. "Tell me about the plant," I said. He blinked. "Why?" "Because I've never asked you." For the next hour, he talked about steel and steam, about men who became brothers through shared labor, about the satisfaction of things that can be measured and weighed. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, as if the memories themselves were providing him with oxygen. "We had a saying," he said. "The oven doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't matter if you come in angry, heartbroken, or cold. The work has to be done." That sounds like Marcus Aurelius. Roman emperor. He had a demanding job too. I smiled. He wrote that when you get up in the morning, you should say to yourself, "The people I am going to deal with today will be meddlesome, ungrateful, arrogant, and dishonest. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and I have recognized that wrongdoers are of a nature similar to my own." An elegant way of saying that the work has to be done anyway. Exactly. My brother returned with 3 coffees, although my father couldn't drink his. We sat together for the first time in 5 years, while my father dozed between words. My brother showed me the consent forms for the operation, the insurance papers, the small bureaucratic details of the crisis he had been dealing with alone. "I can do the morning shift," I offered. "You don't have to." "I know. That's why it's my duty." Afternoon gave way to evening. The nurses changed shifts efficiently, each briefing the next and maintaining continuity of care. They moved economically, without unnecessary movements, without sentimentality. Duty reduced to its essence. My father woke up briefly. "Guys, you should go home." "We're fine here," my brother said. "It's not your job." I leaned forward. "Actually, it is. Children sitting next to their father, that's exactly your job." He looked at us both, and then closed his eyes. He wasn't sleeping, just thinking. "Your mother sat next to her father for the last 3 months, every day. Once I asked her why she bothered, if he didn't even recognize her anymore. She said it wasn't about him recognizing her, it was about being there." Suddenly the metaphor of the lighthouse that Mrs. Chen had mentioned made sense. A lighthouse doesn't choose the ships it guides. It doesn't need recognition from the ships it saves. It simply stays where it needs to be, illuminating the darkness, fulfilling its function regardless of the weather or whether it is recognized. "We should talk about Thursday," said my brother. "The operation." "A 7-hour procedure," said my father, his eyes still closed. 60% successful. 70, my brother corrected. "The doctor checked it today." "Even so." We sat there with those numbers. In the hallway, someone was crying, silent, exhausted sobs. Another kind of duty was being fulfilled, pain as a form of assistance. "If things go wrong," my father began. "They won't go wrong." "But if they do..." He opened his eyes and looked at us both. "I need you to know something. The work I'm most proud of isn't at the factory. It's you two. It may be an imperfect project, but it's mine." My brother's hand rested on my shoulder. He squeezed once. Our own silent language, born of a shared history. "We'll be here on Thursday," I said. "Before and after." "All the time," my brother added. "You don't have to." "It's our duty," we said almost in unison. My phone vibrated. An emergency at work. The Singapore deal was falling apart. 3 months of negotiations were vanishing because someone had hurt their ego. I felt the usual heat rising, that particular rage I reserved for avoidable disasters. My father watched me as I looked at the screen. "Go if you have to." "It can wait." But I couldn't, really. The messages kept coming, each one tightening the knot in my stomach. David's panic, Sarah's accusations, the client threatening to walk away. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, ready to unleash the fury I'd been building up since breakfast. Then I noticed my father's hand, trembling slightly as he reached for his glass of water. The anger transformed and redirected itself toward his weakness, toward time itself, toward my own inability to fix any of this. "You're angry," he observed. "I'm fine. Your mother used to do that with her jaw when she was angry. Now you're doing it." I forced my face to relax, but the emotions sank deeper. The Stoics had a word for this: pathos, the passion that disturbs reason. Seneca called anger brief madness, a fever that burns judgment and leaves destruction in its wake. My brother returned with 3 coffees, juggling them despite the cast on his wrist. "Everything okay?" "Work stuff." He handed me a cup, black, no sugar. He had remembered. "Let me guess, someone screwed up and now you have to fix it." "Something like that." "You've always been the one who fixes things." It wasn't a judgment, just an observation. "Remember when Mom's car broke down that Christmas? How old were you? 16. You spent the whole night in the garage with the manual. And you didn't fix it. But you tried. All night, your hands bleeding from the cold metal." He sat down in the visitor's chair across from me. "Dad found you asleep under the car at dawn." I didn't remember that part. My father nodded slowly. "I wrapped you in my coat. I let you sleep for another hour before waking you up for school." The anger began to crumble, losing its edge. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant: how quickly emotions dissolve when you examine them through the prism of memory, when you place them in the broader context of a life. My phone vibrated again. This time, I left it face down on the nightstand. "The Singapore Agreement?" my brother asked. He had always paid more attention than I gave him credit for. "It will survive or it won't." "That's not like you." He was right. The old me would already be halfway to the office, phone glued to my ear, gathering resources and demanding information. But sitting in that sterile room, watching my father struggle with the simple complexity of drinking water with trembling hands, I felt the futility of such behavior. The Stoics taught that emotions are not just feelings but judgments. Anger says, "This shouldn't have happened." Fear says, "This will destroy me." Pain says, "This loss is unbearable." But what if we examined those judgments as suspect evidence? "Tell me about the operation," I said to my father. "Triple bypass. They say it's routine now." Routine. As if opening the chest and rebuilding a heart could be routine. Fear stirred, not the emotion itself, but its shadow, what Epictetus called the first movement. You can't control that first jolt, he taught, but you can control what comes after. Are you afraid? The question surprised us both. My father thought about it. On Thursday morning, they'll take me into the operating room. Either I'll wake up or I won't. Being afraid doesn't change the outcome. Very stoic of you. Is that what it is? I thought it was just fatigue. My brother laughed, but there was something else in his laughter, perhaps relief, that we could continue talking like this, that everything hadn't turned into silence. The afternoon wore on. Nurses came and went, checking vital signs, adjusting medication. My phone continued to vibrate insistently, but no longer with the same urgency. Sarah sent me 17 messages, each more catastrophic than the last. David called twice. The client sent an ultimatum. I stepped out into the hallway and called Sarah. "Finally! Where were you? Everything is falling apart." "Sarah, stop. Breathe." We don't have time for breathing exercises. We don't have time for panic either. Give me the facts. Just the facts. No interpretation. She paused and gathered herself. The client thinks we've been dishonest about the timeline. They're threatening to pull out. David promised delivery by March, but the engineers say it won't be May at the earliest. Okay, what really happened? David promised March, but that was before the scope changed. And the scope changed because? The client added features. Then we're not being dishonest. We're responding to their changes. It's a different story. But they're furious. They're scared. They have their own bosses, their own pressures. Anger is just fear, dressed up as something stronger. I could hear him breathing more slowly. What do I do? Send them the documentation. Every change in scope, every approval, every adjustment to the schedule that they signed. No comments, no defenses, just the facts. Let the evidence speak for itself. That's it? That's it. Either they'll come to their senses or they won't, but you'll have done what you could. When I returned to the room, my father was asleep, breathing steadily but unevenly. My brother had gone over to the window and was watching the workers laboring in the golden hour. "Everything ready?" he asked. "Everything ready." "You're different, calmer." I thought about Mrs. Chen's teachings, the morning walks, the gradual realization that my emotions were not facts, but interpretations. "I'm trying." The surgery was scheduled for 6 in the morning on Thursday. I arrived at 4:30 and found the hospital already bustling with that particular energy you feel before dawn. The night shift nurses were counting down the hours, and the morning staff was slowly arriving with coffee and determination. My father was awake, staring at the ceiling tiles as if they held the answers. "Can't you sleep?" I asked him. "I've never been able to before important days. Your mother used to make me chamomile tea." He turned his head toward me. "You always made it very weak. I never told you that." We sat in that peculiar silence that precedes important events, not uncomfortable, just charged with meaning. The monitors emitted their electronic mantras. Outside, the city began its daily resurrection. "I can't stop thinking about the Rubicon," my father said suddenly. "Caesar." "No, the real river. I visited it once, years ago, on a business trip to Italy. It's nothing impressive. Narrow, muddy. You can cross it in dress shoes." But Caesar knew that once he crossed it, everything would change. There would be no turning back. He gestured vaguely toward the IVs. "This morning, I feel like I'm in my own river." The orderlies arrived before I could respond, efficient and cheerful as experience had taught them. As they prepared to take him away, my father grabbed my wrist. His grip was stronger than I expected. "If anything happens..." "Dad, listen. Just listen. The business, the house, everything is taken care of. The papers are in the safe, but there's something else." He pulled me closer. "Stop fighting so hard. You're wearing yourself out." Before I could ask him what he meant, they started moving and the stretcher slid down the hallway toward doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." I stood there, his words echoing in the antiseptic hallway. The waiting room was a study in human anxiety. Families huddled in small clans, some silent, others chatting nervously about nothing. I found a seat in a corner and opened Marcus Aurelius, but the words swam meaninglessly. Instead, I watched a young mother across from me trying to entertain a toddler while her older son slept across 3 chairs. The toddler kept trying to climb onto a small table, and she kept pulling him down. Up, down, up, down. With increasing frustration, she clenched her jaw and moved more abruptly. Finally, she simply moved to another seat, away from the table. The toddler found a magazine to tear up, happy with his destruction. She let him be. Water around obstacles. Mrs. Chen had mentioned this once, during one of our walks. We had come across a fallen tree blocking the path, and instead of turning back, she had simply stepped off the trail and walked around it through the surrounding grass. "You would have tried to move the tree," she said without asking. She was right. I would have. In fact, I had done so in every aspect of my life. The Singapore deal. Instead of working around the client's resistance, I had tried to steamroll it. My father's illness. Instead of accepting reality, I had fought it with research, second opinions, and rage at the injustice. My phone rang. Sarah. "I did what you told me. I sent everything. No comments." "And? They've called a meeting tomorrow morning. They want to reevaluate the partnership." The old me would have exploded. I would have started devising counterattacks, preparing arguments, gathering forces. Instead, I heard myself say, "Okay." Okay, that's it. What else is there? They'll decide what they decide. We'll respond accordingly. But we could lose the contract. Yes. Aren't you worried? I thought about it. I am worried, but worrying isn't going to change anything. We've done a good job. The paperwork is in order. If they leave, we'll find other clients. If they stay, we'll give it our best shot. Either way, the sun will rise tomorrow. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Who are you, and what have you done to my boss?" After hanging up, I headed to the coffee shop. It was filling up with morning employees, and finally, the coffee was freshly brewed instead of burnt. I sat down by a window overlooking the construction site. The workers had made progress. What had once been a hole was now a foundation. They worked with economical movements without wasting energy, each focused on their task. This was what Epictetus meant by discipline of desire. Wanting what happens, not demanding that the universe conform to your will. The construction workers weren't rebelling against gravity or the weight of concrete. They were working with these realities, not against them. My brother arrived at 7, with 2 cups of real coffee he had gotten somewhere other than the hospital. "Any news?" "Not yet. It could be hours." He sat down next to me, and together we watched the city wake up. Traffic intensified. Pedestrians multiplied. The everyday world went about its usual business, indifferent to our vigil. "He told me to stop fighting so hard," I said. "He told me to stop avoiding so much," my brother replied. "Last week, he said he was floating through everything, never getting involved, opposing problems, maybe with the same root, fear of the current." The metaphor was apt. I had swum against the current all my life, exhausting myself against the tide of events. My brother had drifted, never swimming, letting the water carry him. Neither of us had learned to flow with the current, to swim when it was necessary to swim, to float when it was wiser, to find stillness in the movement itself. The hospital chapel was empty at 3 in the morning. I had gone there after the cafeteria closed, after my brother went home to check on his children, after the fluorescent light in the waiting room became unbearable. Dad was stable but still in surgery, something about complications, additional repairs needed. The words had blurred in the surgeon's technical update. I sat on the last bench, not exactly praying, just sitting quietly. The space felt different from the rest of the hospital. There were no beeping monitors, no announcements over the loudspeaker, no squeaky stretchers, just silence and the faint smell of old varnish. As a child, I hated being alone. I always needed noise, activity, people. Even to study, I needed background music, the murmur of a coffee shop, something to fill the void. The idea of sitting alone seemed like punishment. Now, 3 weeks after beginning this strange journey that started in Mrs. Chen's garden, I understood what I had been running from myself. The chapel door opened softly. An elderly man entered, nodded to me, and sat down several rows ahead. He took out what looked like a worn diary and began to write by the light of a small reading lamp he had brought with him. The scratching of his pen was rhythmic, meditative. After 20 minutes, he closed the diary, leaned back in his seat, and simply breathed. Then he turned to me. "Can't sleep either. I'm waiting for news about an operation." "Ah." He put the diary in a messenger bag. "I come here every night, between 3 and 4 in the morning. It's the best time of day." "Why?" "No performances, no one watching you. Just you and whatever you're running from." He smiled at my expression. "We all avoid something. During the day, we're great at distracting ourselves. But at 3 in the morning, in an empty chapel, there's nowhere to hide." He left without another word, but his observation lingered in my mind. I took out my phone to check my messages, but stopped myself. I put it away. I sat with the discomfort of having nothing to do, no one to respond to, no crisis to manage. Thoughts came in waves. First, the superficial anxieties, the Singapore Agreement, the quarterly reports, my father's prognosis. Then deeper currents, my failed marriage, the distance between me and my brother, the life I had built that suddenly seemed like someone else's project. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this, these conversations with oneself at dawn. He would wake up before his duties as emperor demanded his attention and write in his journal, not for posterity, but to clarify his thoughts. Those private meditations became the backbone of his strength, the place where he could be honest about his fears, his anger, his struggles with the weight of empire. I found a pencil in my jacket and took a donation envelope from the shelf by the pews. On the back, I began to write. What am I afraid of? Losing control, being normal, being seen as weak. What do I really control? My response, my effort, my decisions in this moment. What matters? Dad getting better, rebuilding my connection with my family. A job that means something beyond metrics. The list grew, messy and honest. No one was going to read it. I didn't have to act. Just me, facing myself in silence. At 4:30, the chapel had worked its strange magic. The panic that had been building for hours had dissipated and turned into something else. Not exactly peace, but acceptance. My father would survive, or he wouldn't. The company would thrive, or it would take a different turn. I would adapt, because that's what human beings do. I returned to the operating room waiting room and found Dr. Martinez looking for me. Your father is out. Everything went well. He asked for you. The recovery room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the soft glow of the monitors. Dad looked smaller, older, but his eyes were alert when I approached him. Hello, warrior, he said hoarsely. Hello to you too. You gave us a scare. I scared myself. He pointed weakly to the glass of water. I helped him take small sips. I had time to think in there. Anesthesia is strange. You go in fighting and come out at peace. What were you fighting against? Time, mortality, the usual. He looked at me intently. You're different, calmer. I've learned a few things. From your Chinese friend? I smiled. From other people, even from you. From me? I was unconscious. You told me to stop fighting so hard. I've been thinking about that. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. All your life you've been at war with something, even as a child. You always had to conquer the playground, the classroom, the competition. It was exhausting to watch you. I learned from the best. No. His voice sharpened. I fought because I had to. I was an immigrant, with no money, with kids to feed. You fight because you don't know how to stop. There's a difference. The truth hurt. He was right. I had inherited his work ethic, but not his wisdom about when to use it. He knew when to push and when to let go. I only knew how to push. The papers, he said suddenly. In the safe. My will, yes, but also some letters. One for you and one for your brother. I wrote them after Mum died, about what I learned too late. Dad, these aren't deathbed confessions, just observations about the cost of certain victories, the price of never stopping long enough to ask yourself why you're running. A nurse came to check his vitals, and I left. The hallway was starting to come alive with the morning shift change, but instead of immediately checking my phone, calling Sarah, and diving back into the whirlwind, I found a quiet corner with a window overlooking the city. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the buildings a soft golden color. Somewhere in those towers, people were already at their desks, beginning their daily battles. I would be back there very soon. But for now, for those few minutes, I could just stand there, alone, but not lonely, still, but not stagnant. This was what Mrs. Chen had tried to show me in her garden, what Marcus Aurelius knew in his tent on the Danube frontier, what all Stoics discovered. Strength is not only built in conflict, it is forged in stillness, in those moments of silence when you stop acting and start being. My phone vibrated. Probably Sarah. Maybe the clients in Singapore. No doubt the world demanding my attention. I let it ring. 3 weeks after my father's operation, I found myself sitting on the back porch of his house, watching him tend his tomato plants. He moved slowly, deliberately, talking to each plant as he searched for aphids and adjusted the stakes. The man who had once run 3 restaurants at once now spent 45 minutes examining 12 tomato plants. "You're going to burn a hole in my head with that stare," he said without turning around. "I'm just watching you work." "This isn't work." He plucked a sprout between 2 branches. "Work is what I did for 40 years. This is something else." I had been spending every morning before going to the office, at first to see how he was recovering, but increasingly just to sit in that haven of peace before plunging into the corporate maelstrom. Sarah thought I was going through a midlife crisis. My brother thought I was trying to secure a larger inheritance. Neither of them understood that I was learning something I couldn't yet put into words. "Try one." Dad handed me a cherry tomato, still warm from the morning sun. The flavor exploded in my mouth. Bright, complex, nothing like the pale spheres from the grocery store. I must have made a face, because Dad laughed, really laughed, for the first time since the operation. It's simple, isn't it? Seeds, soil, sun, water. But when you pay attention, he shrugged, a gesture that said it all. That afternoon, I cancelled a lunch meeting and went to eat a sandwich in the park across from my office. No email, no phone calls, just sitting on a bench with a turkey sandwich and watching. A mother was teaching her young son how to feed the pigeons. An old man was practicing Tai Chi with ceremonial slowness. Two teenagers were sharing headphones and swaying to music I couldn't hear. When had I stopped noticing these things? Marcus Aurelius wrote about the satisfaction he found in breaking bread properly, in figs opening as they ripened, in the foam on a wild boar's mouth. Strange examples, but I was beginning to understand. The emperor who could command legions found joy in observing the crust of bread. The most powerful man in the world cultivated happiness in everyday textures and phenomena. That night, instead of staying late at the office, I went home and cooked. I really cooked. I didn't reheat or order food. Just pasta with garlic and oil, the recipe my mother had taught me decades ago. The garlic sizzled and browned. The pasta water bubbled like a small sea. Such ordinary alchemy, but I had been too busy optimizing my life to actually live it. Sarah came home and found me eating at the dining room table instead of standing at the kitchen counter reviewing reports. "What's so special?" "It's Tuesday." She looked at me suspiciously. "You've been weird lately." "Weird how?" "Present, available. It's unsettling." But she said it with a smile as she served herself. We ate in near silence, but it was a comfortable silence. The kind that had once been impossible for me to bear because of my restlessness. When she mentioned her sister's birthday next month, I listened to her instead of mentally reviewing my commitments. "We should go," I said. "To Phoenix? You hate Phoenix." "I hate the heat, but your sister makes excellent cakes." Sarah put down her fork. "Who are you and what have you done to my husband?" The question haunted me during my morning meditation with Mrs. Chen. We were working in her garden. She insisted that meditation could involve movement when she asked me what I was discovering. "I think I've been confusing deprivation with discipline." She paused in her weeding. "Go on." The Stoics weren't ascetics. They didn't reject pleasure. They just didn't depend on it. Seneca was rich. Marcus Aurelius had the imperial palace. They enjoyed those things without being slaves to them. And you? I've been so focused on being strong, on moving forward, on achieving things, that I've forgotten why any of it matters. I was so busy climbing that I didn't notice the view. He handed me a basket of green beans. "Cut off the ends. Meditate while you do everyday tasks." The repetitive motion was relaxing. Cut, drop, pick up the next one. No goals to achieve, no need to optimize, just the simple satisfaction of preparing food. "Your Western philosophers," he said, "understood something that my tradition also teaches. Joy does not lie in the extraordinary. It lies in paying attention to the ordinary." That weekend, I suggested to Sarah that we walk to the market instead of taking the car. She looked at me as if I had suggested traveling by covered wagon, but she agreed. The walk took 40 minutes. We noticed things. A house being renovated, children playing hockey in the street, an elderly couple holding hands on their porch. At the market, I was very interested in the vendor's explanation of traditional tomatoes and hybrids. Sarah bought too much corn because the farmer's daughter was charming. We carried the bags home through different streets just to see new things. "This is nice," Sarah said, hooking her arm through mine. "What part?" "Everything. The walk, the conversation, not being in a hurry. You haven't looked at your phone once." She was right. My phone was silent in my pocket, its demands temporarily irrelevant. The Singapore deal would close or it wouldn't. The quarterly reports would be favorable or require adjustments. But this morning, this walk, the weight of the fresh produce and my wife's hand on my arm, that was real, immediate, enough. Epictetus taught that wealth does not consist in having great possessions, but in having few needs. I had read it a dozen times without understanding it. Now, carrying corn and tomatoes through our neighborhood, I began to understand. Mental strength was not just about enduring hardship, but about being strong enough to be satisfied, to resist the insatiable hunger for more, to find enough in the simple passage of an ordinary day. Monday arrived with its usual arsenal of crises. The Singapore deal hit a snag. Regulatory issues no one had anticipated. The board wanted answers. 3 department heads needed decisions. But something had changed in my response to chaos. Instead of my usual pattern, skipping lunch, guzzling coffee, pushing on until exhaustion, I took 20 minutes at noon to walk around the block. Just walking. Not to clear my head and think better, not to take calls while I walked, just to feel the sun on my face and watch the rhythm of the city. Tom found me sitting on a bench, watching pigeons fight over a pretzel that had fallen on the ground. The Singapore team is waiting for your call. They can wait 5 more minutes. He shifted uncomfortably. The deadline for submitting the regulatory documentation. It'll still be there whether I take this walk or not. I watched a pigeon execute a particularly ingenious flanking maneuver. Did you know that pigeons can recognize themselves in mirrors? Self-awareness in a creature we consider a pest. Tom looked at me as if I had started speaking ancient Greek, which in a way I had. After all, the Stoics wrote in Greek. Back at the office, I handled the Singapore crisis with unusual calm. When the lead lawyer started catastrophizing about the worst-case scenarios, I interrupted him. What can we actually control here? Silence. Then, little by little, we began to list the controllable aspects. Our response to the regulators, the quality of our documentation, the transparency of our communication. Not the final decision, not the timeline, not the market reaction, just our own actions, executed with excellence. That's all we focus on, I said. Everything else is noise. The meeting ended in half the usual time. Solutions emerged once we stopped fighting circumstances beyond our control. That night, Mrs. Chen introduced me to Marcus Aurelius's concept of the bird's eye view, imagining yourself rising above to see problems from a cosmic height. Your problems with the merger, she said, how important are they from the perspective of the moon? Insignificant. And yet you act diligently. Why? The question followed me home, where I found Sarah in the kitchen, frustrated because her soufflé wouldn't rise. It was her 3rd attempt. Why do you care? I asked, genuinely curious. It doesn't matter. That's why it matters. She took the deflated dough out of the oven. I could buy a perfect soufflé at the French bakery, but there's something about the attempt, the concentration it requires. When it turns out right, it's not about the soufflé, it's about the attention I've given it. I thought of Seneca's letters, where he described the pleasure he derived from a simple loaf of bread, just as he did from an elaborate banquet. Not because he couldn't afford anything better, but because he had trained himself to find satisfaction in the act of eating, not in the luxury of what was being eaten. Teach me, I said. Sarah looked at me skeptically. You want to learn how to make soufflé? You barely know how to make toast. Then first, I'll learn how to make proper toast. We spent the next hour making toast, just toast. The right temperature, the perfect browning, the optimal distribution of butter. It was ridiculous and profound at the same time. There I was, a man who had closed multi-million-dollar deals, learning to pay attention to the browning of bread. "You're different," Sarah said, watching me concentrate on the butter patterns, "ever since you got into philosophy." Better or worse? Different, like you're actually here instead of constantly somewhere else. The next morning, news arrived that the Singapore deal had passed regulatory review. Tom burst into my office, expecting a celebration, champagne, the usual victory dance. Instead, he found me watering the little succulent Sarah had given me months ago, which, to my surprise, was still alive despite my neglect. "We did it," he announced. "We did our part. The rest just fell into place." His enthusiasm faded, confused. "Aren't you happy?" "Yes, but not because the deal is closed. Because we handled the process with skill and integrity. The outcome was never really up to us." I could see that he was struggling to understand this logic. Success was supposed to be synonymous with happiness. That was the formula we had all memorized. But Marcus Aurelius had warned against this equation. How many troubles does he avoid who does not look at what his neighbor says or does? During lunch, which I ate sitting in the park, I watched office workers rush by, eating as they walked, talking on the phone, their faces tense with urgency. I recognized myself in their hunched shoulders and fleeting glances. Always rushing to the next thing, never getting anywhere. A message from Sarah. "Rose soufflé. I'll send you a photo." The image showed a golden creation with a perfect dome, but her follow-up message was more important. "It deflated while cooling, but it's delicious. The joy is in the process." This is what Epictetus meant when he spoke of the discipline of desire, not the elimination of desires, but the ability to desire what you have, finding the feast in simple food, the achievement in the attempt, the richness in the attention itself. That afternoon, reviewing contracts that normally bored me to tears, I found a strange satisfaction in the precision of the language, in the architecture of the agreements. The work itself hadn't changed. What had changed was my presence in it. Mrs. Chen would later tell me that this was the deepest level of Stoic practice, not just enduring hardship or maintaining virtue, but actively cultivating joy in whatever task life presented. "The strong person," she quoted from her well-worn translation of Marcus Aurelius, "is the one who can find happiness in any circumstance, because happiness resides in one's response, not in the circumstance itself." The quarterly review came like a storm that everyone saw coming, but no one could avoid. The partners from the Hong Kong office arrived by plane, their faces carefully impassive as they entered the boardroom. I had been through dozens of these situations, but this one was different. Word had leaked out that they were unhappy with my philosophical experiments, which were affecting team dynamics. Richard Lamb, a senior partner and a man who could make you feel small just by raising his eyebrows, opened the folder with theatrical slowness. "James, your numbers are good. The Singapore deal is exceptional, but we have some concerns." There it was, the criticism sandwich: praise, evisceration, encouragement. "Your team reports that you've become distant, less motivated. Some say you're losing your edge." He read from his notes, quote, "James used to fight for every advantage. Now he just accepts things." Another, "He's gone soft, talking about virtue instead of victory. The old me would have gone on the defensive, listing achievements, questioning sources, deflecting blame. Instead, I pulled out my notebook, where I had been copying Stoic passages, and jotted down all the criticisms as he spoke." Richard paused, confused. Are you taking notes? You're holding up a mirror to me. It would be foolish not to look. Tom shifted uncomfortably beside me. I could feel his anxiety radiating like heat. But there was something liberating about treating criticism as data rather than an attack. Aren't you going to respond? Richard asked, increasingly confused. To what? If the observations are accurate, they're useful. If they're not, they're still useful because they show me how I'm perceived compared to my intentions. Either way, it's valuable information. Richard exchanged glances with the other partners. This wasn't going according to plan. These reviews usually involved heated defenses, political maneuvering, and subtle threats. Your team says you no longer challenge them to strive for excellence. I thought about it. How is the team's performance compared to last quarter? It's up 12%. Stress-related absences? Richard checked his papers. They're down 40%. Customer satisfaction? The highest in the history of your division. So maybe pressure and excellence aren't as closely related as we thought. After the meeting, Tom cornered me in my office. How did you sit there? They basically called you weak. Really? Or have they observed a change they don't understand? I showed him my notes. Look, every criticism contains information. Less motivated. True, if by motivation you mean a constant sense of urgency. Accepts things. Also true when it comes to things that are beyond my control. The point is not whether they are right or wrong, but what I can learn. That evening, Ms. Chen's workshop focused on Marcus Aurelius's approach to criticism. She had us pair up and list each other's observable flaws, not to hurt, but to help. My partner, a startup founder named David, didn't hold back. You intellectualize everything. Sometimes you're so busy being philosophical that you miss the human moment. And you have this subtle superiority, as if you've discovered something the rest of us haven't. Each point hurt because they all contained some truth. But Ms. Chen had taught us Epictetus's approach. Criticism is either true or false. If it's true, the person has done you a favor. If it's false, they've only hurt themselves with their poor judgment. The mirror of others, she explained, shows us angles we cannot see ourselves. The fool breaks the mirrors that show him unflattering reflections. The wise man adjusts his appearance. I thought of Marcus Aurelius writing in his private journal, constantly examining his own failures, criticizing himself more harshly than any enemy. Not out of self-hatred, but out of a commitment to improvement. At home, I asked Sarah to give me her honest opinion about my changes. She put down her glass of wine and looked thoughtful. You're calmer, which is good in general. But sometimes your calmness seems like distance, like you're observing life rather than living it. And this acceptance thing. Sometimes I want you to get angry with me, to care enough to argue. Does arguing mean you care? No, but total equanimity can come across as indifference. Another point of view I couldn't see. I had been so focused on reducing emotional reactivity that I may have dampened emotional connection. The next day, I implemented changes based on the feedback. With the team, I remained calm but added more engagement, asking about their challenges rather than just accepting their reports. With Sarah, I practiced what Marcus called sympathia, feeling with others while maintaining inner stability. Richard Lamb called that afternoon. Your response yesterday, was that some kind of negotiation tactic? No, no tactic, just Stoic practice. You offered observations. I received them. Most people defend themselves. From what? From words? From opinions? Marcus Aurelius wrote that we suffer more in our imagination than in reality. Defending ourselves from criticism only doubles the suffering, first from the words, then from our resistance to them. Silence on his end. Then, the partners want to know if this philosophy is scalable. Could others learn it? Anyone can learn it. Whether they do depends on their willingness to see themselves clearly. That week, 3 different colleagues approached me to talk about the evaluation, hoping for sympathy or conspiracy theories. Each time, I shared my notes from the meeting, the lessons I had learned, and the changes I was implementing. "You're treating it like a performance review, not a political attack," one observed. Wasn't that what it was? A performance review? The distinction was important. Seneca had written about the difference between taking things personally and taking them seriously. The personal was ego. The serious was improvement. By Friday, something had changed. The team that had criticized my softness came to me with issues they had previously hidden, trusting that my response would be measured rather than explosive. Criticism had become a gateway to deeper trust. Mrs. Chen smiled when I shared this insight with her. The armor of righteousness is heavy. The shield of learning is light. Which would you rather wear? The call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah's father had suffered a heart attack. We got dressed in silence, our hands shaking as she tried to button her coat. The drive to the hospital seemed to take forever. The waiting room was in chaos. Sarah's mother was sobbing. Her brother was pacing, making angry calls to doctors who weren't there. Sarah was frozen, clutching my hand so tightly it hurt. I found myself thinking about the pond behind Mrs. Chen's workshop. How, even when the wind whipped its surface into waves, if you looked deep enough, the water remained calm. The surface responded to every gust, but the depths remained still. "He's stable," the doctor finally announced. "Critical, but stable." Sarah's family erupted. Relief, questions, demands. I felt the familiar urge to match their energy, to join the emotional turmoil. Instead, I took a deep breath and found that quiet place Marcus Aurelius spoke of, the inner citadel that external events cannot penetrate. "What do you need?" I asked Sarah quietly. "I don't know. Everything is spinning." "Then we'll stay still until it stops." Over the next few days, I became the family's anchor, not with grand gestures, but with steady calm. When Sarah's brother wanted to get angry at the doctors, I asked specific questions about treatment plans. When her mother catastrophized about the future, I focused on the medical facts of the present. When Sarah swung between hope and despair, I stayed steady in the center. "How can you be so calm?" she asked me one night, exhausted. "Don't you care?" Worrying and panicking are different things. The pond can reflect the storm without becoming it. At work, the crisis continued in a different form. Our largest client was threatening to terminate the contract over a service failure that had occurred before my changes. The old me would have rushed to control the damage. Frantic meetings, emergency protocols, visible signs of concern. Instead, I called a single meeting. "The client is upset," I stated simply. "They have reason to be. We didn't deliver what we promised. Those are the facts. Now, what steps can we take?" Tom started explaining whose fault it was. I raised my hand. Blame is in the past. Solutions are in the present. We outlined clear steps, acknowledgement of the failure, a specific remediation plan, and preventive measures for the future. No drama, no finger-pointing, just a calm assessment and response. Richard Lamb attended the meeting with the client. I watched him as he watched me present our response. No defensive, no excessive apologies, just clear acknowledgement and steps forward. "You're not trying to control their emotions," he observed afterward. "I can't control their emotions. I can barely control my own. All I can do is present the truth clearly and let them respond as they will." The client stayed. Richard's report to the partners included the phrase supernatural calm under pressure. Supernatural, beyond the natural. But Epictetus would have laughed at that. There is nothing more natural than a mind that chooses its own climate, regardless of external conditions. That evening, Ms. Chen led us through a meditation she called the practice of the still pond. We sat by her pond, the autumn wind creating ripples on the surface. "Look," she said, throwing a stone into the center. The circles spread outward, but within seconds, the surface began to calm. The pond does not resist the disturbance. It accepts it and then returns to stillness. This is not passivity, it is resilience. First, she had us practice with small pressures, holding an ice cube while keeping our breathing calm, listening to discordant music while keeping our faces relaxed. Then, more difficult challenges, sharing our deepest fears while others listened without responding, maintaining our composure while she criticized our life decisions. Calmness, she explained, is not the absence of pressure. It is the presence of choice. You choose your inner climate. I thought of Seneca, Nero's advisor, who maintained philosophical calm while navigating the lethal politics of Rome. Of Marcus Aurelius, who wrote meditations on peace while leading armies at war. They did not live in peaceful times, but they created peaceful minds. Sarah's father was slowly improving. Each day brought new complications, new fears. Her family's emotional temperature rose and fell with each update from the doctor. I learned to be the thermostat, not the thermometer, to maintain a constant temperature rather than reflect the chaos in the room. "You're different," Sarah said to me one night. "It's like you've found a secret source of calm." It's not a secret, it's an ancient one. The Stoics knew that agitation doesn't improve anything. If action helps, act. If only time helps, be patient. But dwelling on anxiety doesn't help anything and exhausts everything. She leaned on me. "Sometimes I want you to go crazy with me, to show that you're human. Being human doesn't require being chaotic. Maybe being truly human means choosing peace when everything invites panic." The work crisis was resolved. The health crisis stabilized. But I knew there would be more. There always had been. The difference now was my relationship with pressure itself. It was like time passing over a pond, not like a rock thrown into its depths. Tom took me aside after a particularly tense board meeting, where I had maintained my composure despite aggressive questioning. "Teach me," he said simply. "Whatever it is, I need it." "Start with a decision," I told him. "Decide that your inner state is yours and that you control it, regardless of external pressure. Then practice. Every little moment you choose calm builds the capacity for bigger moments." The seasons changed without asking permission. I watched from my apartment window as autumn surrendered to winter, the leaves letting go not out of defeat, but in accordance with something greater than individual will. Ms. Chen had assigned us the task of observing nature for an entire week without interpreting anything, just observing. "Nature is the first teacher," she had said. "Before books, before philosophers, there was the world showing us how to be." I started with the obvious patterns. The sun rose, the sun set, the tide rose, the tide fell. But the more I looked, the more I saw an intelligence at work, not conscious planning, but an inherent wisdom in how things unfolded. The river did not debate its course. The birds did not hold meetings to decide on migration. Everything moved according to its nature, and in that movement it found its place. Marcus Aurelius had written extensively about this. Everything harmonizes with me. What is harmonious for you, O universe? Nothing is too early or too late for me if it is in its proper time for you. At first, I thought this was passive resignation. Now I understood it differently. It was active alignment. The revelation came during a morning run through Central Park. I was battling a strong headwind, fighting every step, when I noticed a hawk riding the same wind that was defeating me. The same force, but a different relationship. The hawk wasn't fighting, it was cooperating. I changed my route to run with the wind instead of against it. It wasn't giving up, it was strategic harmony. The run became easy. That afternoon, a crisis at work was the perfect test. New regulations had been announced that would fundamentally change our industry. The conference room erupted in protest. This will destroy our profit margins. We have to push back against this. It's completely unreasonable. I listened to the anger and fear, watching my colleagues exhaust themselves fighting reality. When the noise finally died down, I spoke up. The regulations are coming. That's the nature of our current environment. Like winter following autumn. We can spend our energy resisting, or we can adapt our model to flow with the new requirements. You're giving up, Tom accused me. I'm acknowledging reality. A fish doesn't complain about water. It develops gills. We have to develop our equivalent. Richard Lamb leaned forward. What would that look like? We spent the next hour not fighting the regulations, but studying them like naturalists studying a new ecosystem. Where others saw obstacles, we began to see niches. Where others saw restrictions, we found opportunities to innovate. By the end of the day, we had sketched out a new service model that not only complied with the regulations, but used them to our competitive advantage. Companies that fought the changes would wear themselves out. We would flow with them and come out stronger. You've turned a threat into an opportunity, Richard observed privately. I haven't turned anything. I've just recognized that fighting natural laws, whether they're gravity or government regulations, is a waste. It's better to understand the new rules and act accordingly. Sarah noticed the change in my approach to problems. Her father's illness had taught us both that there are forces beyond our control, but she still rebelled against the injustice of it all. It shouldn't be this way, she said after another difficult hospital visit. According to whose design? Illness is also part of nature. So is healing, and death, and pain. Fighting against the existence of these things is like fighting against the existence of rain. So we just accept everything. We accept what is and work with the laws of nature rather than against them. Your father's body follows certain biological patterns. Understanding those patterns helps doctors treat him. Denying them is pointless. She was silent for a moment. When did you become so philosophical? When I realized that philosophy isn't an abstract theory. It's practical wisdom about how to live in harmony with reality. Mrs. Chen's next lesson took us to the botanical garden. We stopped in front of a twisted oak tree that had grown around and through an iron fence, neither destroying it nor being destroyed by it. This tree doesn't complain about the fence, she said. It doesn't want the fence to disappear. It incorporates the obstacle into its growth. This is Wu Wei, effortless action, not forcing but flowing. She had us practice identifying the natural essence of situations. In conversations, instead of imposing our point of view, We learn to feel the flow of the dialogue and introduce ideas when the current was favorable. In problem solving, instead of imposing solutions, we discovered what wanted to emerge. You are not separate from nature, he reminded us. You are nature. A human being is the universe becoming conscious of itself. Your thoughts, emotions, actions, everything is part of the same natural order that moves the planets and makes trees grow. This changed everything. My ambitions were not separate from natural laws. They were expressions of them. The same force that drove seeds to become trees drove me toward growth and contribution. But just as the seed did not strive to become a tree, I did not need to strive to achieve my goals. I needed to understand the natural conditions for growth and align myself with them. Epictetus had said that we were actors in a play we had not written. Our role was to play our part well, not to rewrite the script. But playing our part well meant understanding the nature of the play itself. The invitation to the charity gala arrived on expensive paper with gold lettering embossed on it. Richard Lamb's annual fundraiser, $5,000 a plate, formal attire required. The old me would have seen it as a goldmine for networking, a chance to rub shoulders with the city's financial elite. Now, as I prepared for the event, I wondered what wealth really meant. The ballroom sparkled with more diamonds than stars. Conversations revolved around acquisitions, stock portfolios, and vacation homes in the Hamptons. I moved through the crowd, not touching the champagne, observing the peculiar poverty of abundance. "Marcus!" Richard's voice boomed across the room. He was standing with a group of executives, among them Harold Morrison, whose fortune regularly graced the covers of magazines. Harold was telling us about his new yacht, 60 feet. Harold launched into details, but his eyes showed a strange emptiness. Between descriptions of Italian leather and German engineering, he mentioned his third divorce, his estranged children, his inability to sleep without medication. "You seem to have it all," I said when he finished. "Everything money can buy," he corrected, and the sadness of that distinction hung between us. Ms. Chen had assigned us the task of spending a week noting every moment when we felt rich or poor, but ignoring our bank account balances entirely. My list surprised me. I felt rich when I helped Tom solve a problem at work, when Sarah laughed at my jokes, when I woke up without an alarm, rested, when I chose patience over anger in traffic. I felt poor when I compromised my values for convenience, when I let fear dictate my decisions, when I spoke carelessly and hurt someone, when I knew what was right but lacked the courage to do it. At the gala, I found myself talking to Margaret Wu, a philosophy professor who seemed as out of place as I was. "What interesting people," she remarked, watching a woman complain about the service at her private island resort. "Different definitions of prosperity," I replied. She smiled. "Seneca owned vast properties, you know. He was one of the richest men in Rome, but he said that true poverty wasn't having too little, it was wanting too much. He practiced voluntary poverty regularly, sleeping on hard floors, eating simple meals, to prove to himself that his wealth didn't own him." Did it work? He died with complete serenity, following Nero's order to commit suicide. He lost everything, his property, his position, life itself, and yet he maintained his philosophical calm. I would say that his true wealth remained untouchable. A commotion near the bar caught our attention. Harold Morrison had collapsed, clutching his chest. Paramedics arrived quickly, and as they carried him away on a stretcher, I heard him gasping, but not for his yacht or his portfolios. He was calling for his children. The party resumed awkwardly. Richard found me later on the balcony looking shaken. Harold had had warnings before. Stress, they say. The man has everything, but he can't stop acquiring more. It's as if he's trying to fill a hole that keeps getting deeper. Maybe he's using the wrong currency. Richard raised an eyebrow. Think about it, I continued. If your wealth is external, you'll never have enough, because you can always lose it. The market crash, theft, age, death. It all disappears. But if your wealth is internal, your character, your wisdom, your ability to maintain peace regardless of circumstances, that's yours forever. Philosophy is all well and good, Marcus, but it doesn't pay the bills. I'm not suggesting we ignore material needs. I'm saying they're not wealth, they're tools. A hammer isn't carpentry. Money isn't prosperity. What matters is what you build with it. The next day, Ms. Chen asked us to make an inventory of our true assets. Not stocks or properties, but qualities that couldn't be taken away from us. My list grew throughout the week. The ability to remain calm under pressure developed through months of morning meditation. The knowledge gained from books that have shaped my thinking. Relationships built on trust rather than transactions. Skills acquired through deliberate practice. Resilience gained by facing my fears. The peace I found in accepting what I couldn't control. Tom noticed my change in relationship with money. You used to check your wallet every hour. Now I don't think I've seen you look at it in weeks. It's there, doing what it needs to do. But my real wallet, my investments in my character, those need daily attention. Sarah's father passed away that Thursday. Sitting with her in the hospital chapel, I understood wealth in a new way. Her father had been a janitor and never earned more than $40,000 a year. Yet the chapel was overflowing with people whose lives he had touched, former students he had encouraged, colleagues he had helped, neighbors he had served. He was rich, Sarah whispered through her tears. Very rich. The richest, I agreed. Mrs. Chen's final lesson on wealth was simple. Every night, count your coins, not the metal ones, but the moral ones. Have you increased your courage today? Have you practiced justice? Have you exercised wisdom? Have you shown discipline? These things are valued forever. Everything else depreciates the moment you acquire it. I began to evaluate decisions differently. Would this choice make me richer materially, but poorer spiritually? Would this commitment bring me financial gain, but cost me my character? The algorithm was clear. True wealth was accumulated through virtue, multiplied through practice, and, unlike material goods, increased in value when shared with others. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't for me, but for James, my former partner, who had mortgaged everything in a company that collapsed when its largest customer defaulted on its payments. He was sitting in my kitchen, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. 20 years of work, gone. The house, the cars, the retirement plans. Everything was collateral. His voice broke. I don't know who I am without that. I remembered Mrs. Chen's words from the previous month. Hold everything like water in cupped hands, gently, gratefully, willing to let it flow. You're the same person you were before you had those things, I told him. The house didn't make you generous. The cars didn't make you smart. You already had those qualities, and they were what earned you the rest. That's easy for you to say. You haven't lost everything. She was right. I hadn't lost everything. Not yet. That week, Mrs. Chen introduced us to an exercise she called practicing dying. It wasn't morbid, she insisted, but practical. Each day, we were to mentally let go of something we valued. Monday, imagine losing our job. Tuesday, our health deteriorating. Wednesday, a loved one passing away. Not to attract disaster, but to prove we could survive it. The Stoics called it premeditatio malorum, she explained. But I prefer to think of it as training for liberation. Every attachment you let go of is one less chain. Tom found the exercise very difficult. I can't imagine losing my children. I don't even try. You're not imagining losing love, Mrs. Chen corrected him. You're imagining losing control. Your children will grow up. They will change. They will make decisions you wouldn't make. The more you hold on to them, the more you will both suffer. Love them intensely, but let them go. My own test came sooner than expected. The startup I had invested so much in, both money and hope, sent a terse email. Immediate cessation of operations. $40,000 gone. And what was more painful, the vision I had built around being one of the first investors in the next big thing evaporated. The old me would have spent days wallowing in anger, regret, and what-ifs. Instead, I sat with the news for an hour and then wrote in my journal. I decided to invest based on the information available. The decision was mine. The outcome was not. I learned about due diligence, market dynamics, and my own risk tolerance. The lesson cost me $40,000, a lot of money, but it's a lesson for life. Anyway, that money was never mine. It was only temporarily in my custody. It has passed into another hand. I must move on as well. Richard called it cold. Don't you feel anything? I feel disappointed. But disappointment isn't devastating unless I make it so. The company has failed. That's a fact. How I respond to that fact is my choice. Sarah's relationship also ended that month. 3 years of living together, visiting places to celebrate their wedding. She found him with someone else, in her apartment, in her bed. The betrayal was painful, but seeing her get through it taught me what true detachment is. I can't stop thinking about the plans we made, she said as we drank wine. The house we were going to buy, the names we were going to give our children, the trips we had planned. It's like mourning people who never existed. You're mourning the illusion of control. You thought you could plan the future, but the future is never guaranteed. It never is. Then what's the point of planning anything? Plan the archer's stance, not the arrow's destination. Plan your effort, your values, your daily practices. Build a life that is good, regardless of who is in it or what you have. Then whatever comes will be a bonus, not a necessity. Ms. Chen shared a story about a Zen master whose barn burned down. His neighbors lamented his misfortune. He replied, "We'll see." His horse ran away. "How awful!" they exclaimed. "We'll see," he replied. The horse returned with other wild horses. "How wonderful!" they exclaimed. "We'll see." His son broke his leg, breaking them in. "How awful!" "We'll see." The broken leg exempted his son from military service. "How lucky!" "We'll see." The master understood that events are just events, she explained. Our labels, good, bad, luck, disaster, are attachments we add. Reality is always neutral until we color it with our opinions. I started practicing with small things. My favorite coffee shop closed, an inconvenience but not a catastrophe. A presentation I had perfected was cancelled, an effort redirected, not wasted. Each small release gave me strength for bigger ones. The ultimate test came through my father. Stage 3 diagnosis, 6 months of optimism. The man who had taught me to fish, to drive, to shake hands firmly, reduced to treatment schedules and probability statistics. "I'm not afraid to die," he said during chemotherapy. "I'm afraid of being forgotten." Your influence lives on in all the people you've touched. All the lessons you taught me, I teach to others. That's immortality, not your body, but your impact. He smiled weakly. "When did you get so philosophical?" "When I learned that everything I can lose was never really mine, but everything I've learned, everything I've become because of you, that's mine forever. Cancer can't touch that." The months that followed stripped away any illusion of control. Dad's good days and bad days came and went without pattern. The treatments worked, then stopped working. Hope rose and fell like the tides. But I learned to hold on to even hope without clinging to it, appreciating its presence without depending on its permanence. Dad's painkillers stopped working in the 4th month. I watched him cling to the rails of his hospital bed, his knuckles white, breathing between waves that swept across his face like storm fronts. "They can increase the dose," I offered. "Not yet." His voice came out between clenched teeth. "The pain tells me I'm still here, that I'm still fighting." The nurse looked at me with professional sympathy. "Many patients resist medication. They believe that suffering makes them strong." But Dad's approach went beyond simple stubbornness. Between waves of pain, he explained to me, "Pain is information. It's my body talking. If you silence it completely, I lose that conversation." Mrs. Chen understood when I told her. "Your father understands what most people don't. Pain is not the enemy. It's the resistance to pain that creates suffering." That sounds like semantics. "Watch." He placed his hand over a candle flame and slowly lowered it. "Right now, I feel heat, then discomfort, then pain." He held it there, steady. Pain is just a sensation, nerve signals firing. But watch what my mind does. "This is dangerous. Pull it away. You're hurting yourself." Panic, projection, story. That's suffering. Pain itself, just data. He withdrew his hand, unharmed. A blacksmith doesn't fear fire. He knows exactly how much heat the metal needs, how long to hold it, when to strike it. Pain is his companion, not his enemy. Tom's divorce taught him this lesson in another way. "The lawyers are killing me," he complained after another brutal statement. "They're bringing up every mistake, every argument, every failure as a husband." "Good." He stared at me. "Good? This is torture." "It's a forging process. Every accusation they make, true or false, is heat and pressure. You can let it break you, or you can let it reveal what you need to strengthen. What hurts you the most?" When she says I was absent, that I chose work over family. Was she wrong? His silence was the answer. Then the pain is real. It's showing you exactly what you need to work on. Not for the divorce, that ship has already sailed, but to become the person you want to be. I discovered my own inner toughie through physical training. Sarah convinced me to try Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, promising it would strengthen my character. The first thing it strengthened was my bruises. "You're fighting yourself," my instructor observed after I gave up again, gasping for breath. "You treat discomfort like it's an emergency." Being strangled feels like an emergency. No, being strangled is just pressure on your carotid artery. Your brain has about 6 seconds before there's any real danger, but you give up in 2. Why? Because discomfort triggers panic, and panic triggers surrender. He was right. The actual sensation of being caught in a hold, the pressure, the stretching, the compression, wasn't unbearable. My reaction was, next time count to 4 before you give up. Not to be tough, but out of curiosity. What's really happening? And what are you afraid is happening? In the next round, caught in an arm lock, I counted. 1. Pressure on my elbow. 2. Muscle stretching. 3. Sharp but steady pain. 4. I gave up. Better. You just learned the difference between pain and damage. Most people go through life confusing the two. Richard's pain stemmed from professional failure. His documentary, which he had worked on for 2 years, was rejected by every major festival. 20,000 hours of work for nothing. It's nothing. It's been a lesson. Every frame you shot, every edit you made, every narrative decision, all of that is experience. The festivals didn't reject your ability, they rejected this particular expression of it. Still, it feels like failure. Failure is simply success in learning what doesn't work. The pain you feel? That's your ego dissolving. Let it burn. What's left will be stronger. Ms. Chen shared a parable. A master potter had 2 apprentices. One made perfect pots, but couldn't bear to see them broken. The other made imperfect pots, but studied every crack. Guess which one became the master? The one who studied failure. The one who became his friend. Pain is a teacher if we remain students instead of becoming victims. My father's last weeks proved this truth. As systems failed, dignity dissolved, and the strong man who had carried me on his shoulders became someone I carried to the bathroom. He transformed pain into philosophy. Every loss shows me what was never essential, he whispered one afternoon, under the influence of morphine. I can't walk, but I can think. I can't eat, but I can talk. I can't fix this, but I can choose how to deal with it. Doesn't it make you angry, the injustice? Justice is a childish idea. Life promises experiences, not comfort. This disease is teaching me to let go, to be grateful, to value what really matters. Pain is the price I pay for wisdom I couldn't get any other way. His oncologist called it denial, but I recognized it for what it was, the blacksmith's relationship with fire. Not seeking it out, not avoiding it, but working with it when it came. Sarah's wisdom came after a breakup. The strange thing is that now I'm grateful for the pain, not for the betrayal. That was his decision. But the pain showed me that I had built my identity on someone else's foundation. Every tear was demolition work, clearing the ground for something better. The meditation teacher's voice floated through the studio. Come back to your breath. When thoughts about yesterday or tomorrow arise, gently. I left. Sarah found me in the parking lot, confused. You lasted 12 minutes. New record for shortest attendance. They teach presence as if it were about staying still. The Stoics knew better. Presence is about engagement, not avoidance. She challenged me to prove it. The next morning, making coffee became my laboratory. I didn't rush through the ritual while checking email, but focused on each step. The weight of the water as it filled the kettle, the aroma of ground coffee as it came into contact with the heat, the characteristic gurgling sound after 3 minutes, indicating that it was almost ready. You've been staring at the coffee maker for 10 minutes, observed Tom, who came to visit us for our weekly meeting. I've been present with it. There's a difference between looking and witnessing. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations between battles, not in quiet gardens. For him, presence meant full involvement in the immediate reality, the horse he was riding, the decision he had to make, the fear he had to acknowledge and overcome. Not later, not in memory, but in the living moment of choice. My father understood this during his treatment. "The worst thing isn't the chemotherapy," he said during a particularly tough session. "It's the anticipation, the fear of next Tuesday, the regret about last Tuesday. But this Tuesday, this specific moment, I can handle this moment." The nurse adjusting his IV smiled. Most patients spend all their time somewhere else mentally. Where else is there? The past is memory. The future is imagination. This, he said, tapping the armrest, is the only real space I occupy. Richard's addiction to cinema taught him the opposite lesson. "I watch 4 hours a day," he admitted. "I live through screens, through other people's stories. You know what I've realized? I'm using fiction to escape the non-fiction of my own life." When was the last time you created something instead of consuming it? Months ago, maybe longer. You live in projected presence, manufactured moments that aren't yours. The Stoics would say you're sleepwalking through your real life while hyper-awake in the scripted ones. Ms. Chen shared her practice during our Thursday tea. "Every morning, I set 3 alarms, not to wake me up, but to bring me back. When they go off, whatever I'm doing, I stop and ask myself, where is my mind right now? Usually, it's traveling through time. Where does it go? To rehearsing conversations that might happen, to reliving ones that have already happened. Never here, feeling the warmth of the tea, tasting its bitterness, listening to the ticking of the clock. The present is so small that we keep missing it, looking for something bigger." Tom's divorce taught him to be present through absence. "My daughter said something to me that broke my heart. Dad, you were always at home, but you were never here." She was right. I was physically present, but mentally calculating billable hours or reviewing contracts. What changed? The custody agreement. 2 weekends a month. Suddenly, scarcity created presence. Every hour became precious because it was finite. I stopped multitasking during the time I spent with her. No phone, no thinking about work, just giving my full attention to whatever we were doing. Restriction created awareness. Exactly. Limitation became liberation. When you can't take tomorrow for granted, today gets your full attention. Sarah discovered presence through rock climbing. You can't think about your ex when you're 20 feet up a rock face. You can't worry about tomorrow when the hold you're gripping is crumbling. The rock demands total presence or it drops you. She was right. Physical challenge creates involuntary attention. The body under stress calls the mind back from its wandering. On the last day, Dad was lucid. He gave me the clearest instruction on presence I have ever received. Stop preparing for my death. Stay with me while I die. I don't understand the difference. One is the future. The other is the present. I'm not dead. I'm dying. Active verb, present tense. Join me here, in this moment, in this breath, in this goodbye. Don't rehearse the pain. Experience the connection. The hospice worker later said that most families do exactly what I had been doing, living in the anticipated future loss rather than in the actual connection of the present. They practice grief before it's necessary and miss the love that's still available. My jiu-jitsu instructor extended this principle to combat. Mentally, you're always 3 moves ahead. You plan the submissions before you secure the position. Meanwhile, your opponent is working in the present moment and escaping. I try to be strategic. Strategy is for before and after. During, there are only sensations and responses. Feel what is, not what could be. Your body knows what to do if your mind stops traveling through time. He proved it by rolling with me while blindfolded. Unable to visually plan for the future, I had to exist completely in the tactile present, the pressure, the balance, the equilibrium. He submitted me faster than when I could see. Presence is intelligence. Planning is anxiety disguised as preparation. The workshop survivors met monthly, and Marcus, a former paramedic, shared his philosophy. Emergency medicine taught me something. The patient dying in front of you doesn't care about the one you lost yesterday or the one who will come tomorrow. This bleeding, this airway, this heartbeat, that's your only job. But don't you prepare for different scenarios? Before the call, yes. After the call, we write a report. During is sacred. There is no past, no future. Just this life that requires your complete presence. Marcus Aurelius wrote it in his tent between battles. What is not good for the swarm is not good for the bee. I found the quote underlined in my mother's diary 3 days after her death. Next to it was her note. Strength is not individual. Hundreds of people attended the funeral. People I had never seen before told little stories of kindness. A meal brought to someone who was sick, driving someone to chemotherapy, paying for a student's classes who was struggling. Mum built her strength on connection, not isolation. Your mother understood something, Mrs. Rodriguez told me, squeezing my hand at the reception. True strength multiplies when it is shared. She made us all stronger by teaching us how to support each other. The Stoic book club met in the basement of the library. 8 strangers at first, united only by a curiosity about ancient philosophy. Tom started it after his divorce, not for wisdom, but for companionship. I thought Stoicism meant going it alone, he admitted during our 3rd meeting. Self-sufficiency, emotional independence, and all that. But then I discovered Heracles and his circles. The self, the family, the community, humanity, concentric rings of concern. Janet, the retired teacher, nodded. The self is the starting point, not the destination. You become stronger to serve something greater. She was living it. 30 years of teaching in disadvantaged schools, choosing difficulty over comfort. People think toughness means not needing anyone. But look at geese when they fly. They take turns leading, they line up behind each other, and they encourage each other with honks. It's natural law. We're made for interdependence. My neighbor Carl embodied this paradox. Fiercely independent, yet deeply connected. He lost a leg in Afghanistan, refused help with grocery shopping, but every winter he organized the snow removal system for the entire block. I don't need charity, he would say, and then spend 6 hours clearing the driveways of elderly neighbors. This is contributing. It's something completely different. That sounds like semantics. No, it's physics. A bridge is strong because each piece supports the weight of the entire structure. If you remove one cable, the rest has to work harder. I'm not accepting help. I'm the cable that hasn't broken yet. The cancer support group revealed how individual strength becomes collective value. Margaret, in stage 4, was mentoring Jennifer, who had just been diagnosed. It wasn't toxic positivity, but honest preparation. I don't tell her everything is going to be okay, Margaret explained. I show her it can be done. My stability becomes her possibility. Her questions become my purpose. We're training partners in an unwanted marathon. Dr. Kim, our facilitator, called it borrowed strength. Sometimes you can't generate your own courage, so you lean on someone who's been through the same thing. Then later on, you become the lender. Courage circulates like money. This circulation appeared everywhere once I started looking for it. The Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, where strangers became lifelines. The gym, where injured athletes trained beginners by telling their own stories of recovery. The grief support group, where loss became a common language rather than a private exile. Isolation is the enemy of resilience, Sarah said as we drank coffee after climbing. Solo climbers get the glory, but most die alone. Teams survive. You need someone to check your knots, help you avoid falls, and share the weight of the gear. Her climbing club was a perfect example of this. Advanced climbers taught beginners, not for money, but for the good of the community. All strong climbers were once afraid at 10 feet off the ground. We remember that fear. Helping others overcome it is a tribute to all those who helped us. The morning basketball game in the park. Old guys, bad knees, pure joy. They had been playing together for 20 years, watching each other grow old, get divorced, remarry, lose their jobs, find new ones. "This is my church," Eddie said, missing another free throw. "We come, we play, we witness each other's lives. That's strength, knowing that you're seen, even when you lose." Marcus, the former paramedic, organized a practical philosophy workshop. These weren't lectures, but hands-on classes. Stoicism isn't theoretical. It's applied physics. We need labs to test these principles. We practiced negative visualization together, imagining a loss while surrounded by support. Voluntary group discomfort, cold baths, fasting, silent retreats. The shared experience transformed individual struggles into collective achievement. Alone, I gave up cold water immersion after 30 seconds, Rebecca admitted. With all of you watching, not judging, just observing, I lasted 2 minutes. Your presence became my strength. It wasn't group pressure, it was group power. The difference was important. Pressure pushes you toward other people's goals. Power supports you in achieving your own. My father's hospice room became an unexpected classroom on the power of community. The nurses, who took turns, each taught something different about coping with death. The other families in the hallway shared coffee, silence, and understanding. "Death is the ultimate community experience," said the chaplain. "Everyone you meet here is facing the same teacher. Some are further along in the lesson, some are just starting out, but no one graduates alone." My father's last weeks proved it. Friends from 40 years ago showed up with stories, meals, their presence. His strength had not been forged in solitude, but over decades of being there for others who were now there for him. The startup incubator operated on similar principles. Entrepreneurs supported their competitors because shared learning elevated them all. "Your success doesn't diminish mine," the founder explained. "A thriving ecosystem propels all companies. We're developing the muscle memory of the entire community." Even the toughest Stoics understood this network of connections. Epictetus, born a slave, taught that we are all fragments of a divine whole. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of millions, wrote reminders about universal citizenship. Seneca, rich beyond measure, argued that virtue without social benefit was nothing more than embellished selfishness. The trophy case in the school lobby lied. Golden promises that winning meant you were worth something, that losing meant you had failed. I stood there after giving my talk to the seniors, watching them take pictures next to dusty trophies from 1987. "Those kids from '87, said the janitor, walking by with his mop bucket. "Half of them are divorced, a quarter are alcoholics, and a couple are dead. But man, that year they were gods." Success, the word itself, had become poison. My investment portfolio had tripled and then evaporated in 2 weeks. The promotion I had pursued for 3 years lasted 6 months before the company went bankrupt. The marriage everyone envied ended with lawyers dividing the furniture. "You're not a failure," my therapist told me. "You're just measuring wrong. My bank account says otherwise." Your bank account measures numbers, not character. Did you act with integrity during the market crash? Did you fulfill your obligations when you lost your job? Did you behave honorably during your divorce? Marcus taught me this distinction as he rebuilt his life at age 62. He lost his construction company, his home, and his reputation after a partner embezzled him. He found work as a carpenter's assistant, earning a quarter of what he used to make. "People keep saying I'll bounce back," he said, measuring wood with expert precision, "as if this is a temporary setback before inevitable victory. But what if this is just life? What if success is showing up to cut wood when you used to own the lumber yard?" His hands, marked by 40 years of construction work, moved with the same care whether he was building mansions or fixing garden sheds. The work itself hadn't changed, only the marker. "I built a reputation over 30 years and lost it in 30 days. But my skill, my commitment, my ability to create something useful, no one can take that away from me." That week's philosophy club meeting focused on the ancient Greek concept of Arete, excellence of character regardless of outcome. Dr. Williams, our moderator, asked us to make a list of our recent failures and successes and examine what remained constant in both. Jennifer's list was brutal. Successes: I got engaged, landed my dream job, ran my first marathon. Failures: my fiancé broke up with me. I was laid off after a merger. A stress fracture prevented me from running. What remained the same? Dr. Williams asked. I kept going. Even when everything fell apart, I kept going. That's your real success. The commitment, the work, the marathon. That was just the weather. Your character was the climate. This distinction appeared everywhere once I learned to see it. The novelist who had written for 20 years without publishing, creating art without caring about recognition. The teacher whose students forgot her name but remembered her lessons. The nurse who treated homeless patients with the same precision as celebrities. Results are costume jewelry, my grandfather used to say. Character is gold. His own life proved it. He was an Olympic alternate and never competed, but he opened a gym. He coached kids for free, most of whom never won anything. At his funeral, 300 people spoke about how he had changed their lives, not with victories, but with consistency. The founder of a technology company I interviewed put it very bluntly. I've started 9 companies, 6 failed, 2 broke even, and 1 made billions. The billion-dollar exit got me magazine covers, but the failures taught me who I was. Success revealed nothing. Failure revealed everything. So you would choose failure. I would choose indifference to both. Do the work because the work matters, not because of what the work might bring you. Sarah discovered this after her art exhibition was a failure. 3 years of preparation, 12 people attended, 0 sales. The next morning, she was back in her studio. Everyone asks me if I'm devastated, but I painted those pieces because they had to exist, not because they had to be sold. The exhibition was just one of many possible outcomes. The important thing was the art itself. With the walls of her studio covered in unsold masterpieces, She worked with the same intensity as when galleries called her. External validation is the weather. Internal commitment is the climate. The boxing gym made it physical. Seeing the boxers train in the same way, whether preparing for championship fights or practicing sparring. The punch doesn't know if there's an audience. The footwork doesn't care about the bag. You fight the same in an empty gym as you do in Madison Square Garden, explained trainer Terry. If you need an audience to give your best, you've already lost. The work is the reward. My father's approach to his illness embodied this perfectly. Good days and bad days, hopeful prognoses and terminal verdicts. He maintained the same discipline. Exercise in the morning, reading in the afternoon, phone calls to his friends in the evening. Cancer may win, he said, but that's just the score. How I play these innings, that's the game. Even in hospice, he kept to his routine. Weakened, but not defeated. Dying, but not giving up. The nurses called him their teacher, as they learned that success was not about beating death, but facing it with dignity. The ancient Stoics called this prohairesis, moral choice independent of outcome. Epictetus, a slave who was later freed, taught that external conditions were indifferent. Wealth or poverty, fame or anonymity, even life or death were merely the stage. What mattered was the performance itself. You are an actor in a play, he said. You don't choose the role, the script, or the length. You choose how to play the role you've been given. The moment stretched out like candy. My partner was across the conference table, having just announced that he had secretly sold our patent to a competitor. 20 years of friendship, 5 years of development, gone in a single betrayal. My hand had already clenched into a fist. Heat rose up my neck. Every cell in my body screamed for violence. Then I remembered Viktor Frankl's words, engraved in my mind since college. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. I opened my fingers. I took 3 deep breaths. I chose. I need 24 hours to process this. See you tomorrow at noon. Getting out of there took everything I had, but in that space between betrayal and response, I found something more valuable than revenge: sovereignty over my own mind. Marcus taught me this consciously, although he had learned it unconsciously through his recovery from addiction. Every impulse has a half-life, he explained during our morning run. The desire appears. It seems infinite, but if you stop, really stop, it peaks and fades away. The trick is to create space for it to fade away. His sponsor had given him a rubber band to wear on his wrist. Snap it when you feel the urge, not as punishment, but as a score. It marks the moment when choice exists. He had been sober for 15 years and still wore it. People think sobriety is about saying no to drinking. It's about saying yes to the pause before you drink. That pause is where you live or die. Neuroscience backed it up. Dr. Chen showed me brain scans from her study on impulse control. See this space? That's milliseconds between when the amygdala fires and the prefrontal cortex responds. That's where humanity resides. That's what sets us apart from pure reaction. She had studied emergency room doctors and observed how they trained to expand that space. On day 1, trauma hits and they panic. By year 5, with the same trauma, they pause, assess, and choose. They've learned to create a space between stimulus and response. Can anyone learn this? Watch. He showed me pictures of children in his program. Week 1. A child is pushed and immediately pushes back. Week 12. The same child is pushed, pauses, counts to 3, and chooses how to respond. We teach them that it's a superpower. The ability to pause makes you stronger than anyone who can only react. My daughter discovered this during her divorce. Her ex-husband's lawyer kept provoking her, trying to get emotional responses that would look bad in court. I started pretending I was watching myself on TV, she told me, as if I were outside my body, directing the scene. That gave me a strange distance from my own anger. That distance was everything. Instead of reacting to the provocations, she paused, sometimes uncomfortably long, and then responded with clarity and restraint. The lawyer's tactics failed. The judge noticed her composure. He controlled the questions, but I controlled my answers. That space between his words and mine was my territory. The monastery I visited in Japan had incorporated this principle into its architecture. Each door required you to take a step forward and bow slightly, forcing a moment of conscious transition. The abbot explained it this way: you cannot pass through unconsciously. Each threshold demands presence. As I walked through the temple, I realized how these forced pauses changed everything. Instead of rushing from room to room, I found myself naturally pausing, breathing, choosing how to enter each space. We spend most of our lives sleepwalking, said the abbot. We react to everything. We choose nothing. These doors wake you up. They make the choice conscious. The same principle appeared in Maria's boxing gym, although she called it something else. The magic isn't in the punch, it's in the recoil. That moment after you get hit, before you hit back. Champions live in that space. She made her fighters practice taking hits without immediately counter-attacking. Just absorb, process, and then choose your response. Street fighters react. Boxers respond. That's the difference between violence and art. Watching her students train, I saw it clearly. The novices just reacted. They took a punch and threw another without pause. The advanced boxers created space, even in the heat of combat. They hit, paused, chose, and responded. It's not about thinking, Maria clarified. It's about not stopping thinking. You're not unconscious or overthinking. You're present in the choice. This presence saved Tom's marriage. I used to have a very short temper. My wife would criticize something and I would explode before she finished talking. It was destroying us. His therapist had him practice what she called the sacred pause. When he felt provoked, he would literally announce, "I'm going to take a pause." Then he would leave the room for 90 seconds. At first, my wife thought I was overreacting, but those 90 seconds changed everything. I came back as myself, not my reaction. After 6 months, his wife started taking her own breaks. Now, when things get heated, one of us asks for space. We've replaced our worst moments with conscious decisions. The prison meditation program I volunteered for made me understand this viscerally. These men lived in an environment designed to provoke constant reactions, disrespect, violence, dehumanization. Here, pausing before you react can cost you your life, one inmate told me. But reacting without pausing had already killed me. That's why I'm here. He had killed someone in an instant reaction to disrespect. 20 years later, he was teaching other inmates the pause that could have saved both their lives. The heart monitor stopped at 3:47 a.m. I watched as Dr. Sarah Hendricks continued chest compressions, her face impassive, her rhythm steady. 20 minutes of CPR, No panic, no despair, just constant pressure and release. When she finally pronounced him dead, she removed her gloves with the same calm she had shown throughout. "How do you manage to stay so calm?" I asked her later in the break room. She poured herself a cup of coffee with the precision of a surgeon. "The patient needs my skills, not my emotions. Getting carried away by the drama doesn't help anyone." It wasn't coldness. I had seen her cry in her car after losing a child. It was equanimity, the emotional ballast that kept her functional when functionality was most important. Marcus taught me about ballast boats during our sailing lessons. "See these weights at the bottom? They keep the boat upright no matter how hard the wind blows. Without them, we'd capsize at the first strong gust." He had learned this after his bankruptcy. He lost everything in 2008, his home, his retirement, his reputation. The first month, I was just reacting. Anger, despair, denial, more anger. I was a boat without ballast, tossed about by the waves. His therapist introduced him to Stoic practices. Morning reflection. Examine his responses from the previous day without judging them. Evening detachment. Free himself from the events of the day as if he were putting down heavy suitcases. Throughout the day, rational thinking as an anchor. I started asking myself, does my emotional response help or hurt the situation? Usually the answer was that it hurt. The practice was not about repressing emotions. Marcus still felt everything. Anger toward abusive lenders, pain over lost security, shame at having to move in with his adult daughter. But he learned to feel without being controlled by his feelings. Emotions became a passing time rather than the climate in which I lived. My mother demonstrated this during chemotherapy. The oncology ward was chaos. Alarms, emergencies, other patients in crisis. She would sit in her chair, poison dripping into her veins, reading philosophy books as if she were in a library. "I can't control the cancer," she would say. "I can't control the treatment, but I can control whether I let it all destabilize me." She developed what she called her observation practice. Every morning, she imagined herself as an astronomer, looking down on her life from a great distance. From far enough away, even hurricanes look calm. It's all a matter of perspective. This distance did not make her passive. She fought hard. She researched treatments, advocated for herself, and made difficult decisions. But she did so from a place of stability rather than panic. The monastery kitchen where I worked one summer operated on similar principles. During the lunch rush, orders flew, pots boiled, and every minute brought a new crisis. The head chef, Brother Francis, moved like water, fast but unhurried, focused but unruffled. In the kitchen, equanimity is the mise en place of the mind, he explained. Everything is in its place internally, so that the external chaos doesn't destabilize you. He taught me to observe my inner state without getting carried away by it. Do you feel frustrated when orders pile up? Observe it, name it, and let it pass. Don't feed it with stories about how things should be. The kitchen doesn't care about your emotional state. The food still needs to be cooked, so you learn to be the fixed point in a spinning world. This principle saved Janet's legal career. As a public defender, she faced impossible cases, hostile prosecutors, and clients whose lives were hanging in the balance. At first, she let her emotions get the better of her. Euphoria over victories, devastation over defeats, and constant anxiety in between. I was burning out fast. Then I met an older lawyer who had been in the business for 40 years. Same crushing workload, same tragic cases, but he had this quality, like a mountain in the middle of a storm. He taught her the practice of nightly review. Every night, she would examine the day's events as if they were someone else's life. What went well? What could be improved? No self-flagellation, no dramatic narratives, just a calm assessment. It's like being your own supervisor, but a kind one. You look for patterns, not ammunition to attack yourself. Within a year, Janet's effectiveness doubled, not because she worked harder, but because she stopped wasting energy on emotional turmoil. She could lose a case in the morning and defend it brilliantly in the afternoon, each moment separate, with her full attention on each client. The stock trader I interviewed had learned equanimity the hard way. I lost 3 million in one day because I sold in a panic. The next month, I made 5 million by staying calm during a crash. The market didn't change. My internal state did. He showed me his trading desk. Above his monitors was a sign. The market is neutral. Your reaction is not. Every rise or fall triggers the fight or flight response. It's evolution trying to keep you alive. But in the world of finance, those ancient programs will lead you to ruin. His practice. Before each trade, 60 seconds of breathing. After each loss or gain, 90 seconds of reflection. I'm creating a space between the stimulus and the response. That space is worth millions, literally. The war veterans I worked with understood this perfectly. They had lived through situations where emotional stability meant survival, both for themselves and their unit. In a firefight, the one who loses his cool gets people killed, explained a sergeant. You learn to find that center of calm, even with bullets flying. It's not bravery, it's trained equanimity. The first time I witnessed a true examination of conscience, I was 17 and watching my grandfather fill out his nightly journal. Every night at 9 o'clock, he would sit down at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and a worn notebook and go over his day like an accountant reviewing the books. "What are you writing?" I asked him once. "Today's truth," he replied without looking up. "Where I was, where I should have been, and where I wasn't." He showed me a page, 3 columns, actions, intentions, corrections, no frills, no self-pity, just facts. Lost my temper with the bank teller. Intention, patience. Tomorrow, pause before speaking when frustrated. Helped neighbor with fence, in line with service. Continue. Skipped my morning walk. Excuse, rain. Truth, laziness. Tomorrow, walk no matter what. This wasn't self-flagellation. His tone was neutral, like a scientist recording data. "You can't fix what you don't see," he said, "and you can't grow if you're not honest about where you are." Years later, I met Sarah, a recovering alcoholic who credited introspection with saving her life. It wasn't a dramatic intervention, but a daily, gradual process that really works. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they tell you to take a moral inventory without fear, she explained. But I do it every night, 10 minutes. What did I do today that brought me closer to the person I want to be? What took me away from that? She pulled out her phone and showed me her notes app. Simple entries. I wanted to lie to my boss about being late. Instead, I told him the truth. It was hard, but it was the right thing to do. I felt a wave of resentment toward my ex-husband when I picked up the kids from school. I noticed it and didn't act on it. I had lunch alone instead of joining my co-workers. Isolating behavior. Tomorrow, eat with others. It's not about being perfect, Sarah emphasized. It's about being aware. Mental strength isn't about never falling down. It's about knowing exactly where you are so you can correct your course. The practice transformed her recovery. While other members of her group relapsed during times of stress, Sarah's daily check-in became her early warning system. She detected patterns, increased irritability, progressive isolation, before they became dangerous. It's like having a personal GPS. You can stray off course, but you realize it immediately, not miles down the road. Dr. Rodriguez, a trauma surgeon I interviewed, had developed his own version during his residency. The stakes in surgery made self-examination not optional, but a matter of survival. After every operation, especially the ones that went wrong, I did what I called the review. It wasn't the official morbidity and mortality conference, but my own private audit. He went over every decision, every cut, every moment of hesitation, not to torture himself, but to extract lessons. Where did ego get in the way? Where did fatigue affect judgment? Where did I operate based on knowledge and where on assumptions? One case haunted him. A young mother, a routine operation, an unexpected complication. She survived, but only just. The review showed me that I had ignored a subtle sign because I was so sure of myself. Unchecked confidence is arrogance. That review probably saved the next 10 patients. He taught his residents to practice this, but most resisted. It's uncomfortable to look at your mistakes without defenses, but that discomfort is where growth lies. The principal of the school I followed had made self-evaluation an institutional practice. Every night, she reviewed her interactions with students, teachers, and parents. A simple framework. Was I fair? Was I kind? Was I effective? I had to expel a boy today, she told me one afternoon. He's a good kid, but he made a bad decision. At the time, I was angry because he brought drugs to school, but looking back on it tonight, I realized that I let that anger show in the way I spoke to him. She noted that she would seek him out the next day to uphold the punishment but adjust her tone. Discipline without dignity is just punishment. My job is to correct, not humiliate. This principal's retention rate was extraordinary. Teachers stayed and students thrived. When I asked her what her secret was, she pointed to her nighttime practice. Most leaders never examine their impact. They assume that intention equals effect, but there's always a gap. Self-examination shows you that gap. Marcus, the former banker from the previous chapter, had added self-examination to his equanimity practice. Every night, 3 questions. In what situations did I act out of fear today? In what situations did I act wisely? What would the person I am becoming do differently? The third question is crucial, he explained. It's not about punishing yourself for who you were today. It's about building who you will be tomorrow. He showed me several weeks' worth of entries. Patterns emerged. Fear shot up in conversations about money. Wisdom appeared in moments when he was teaching others. The person he was becoming spoke more in community meetings. Self-examination without self-compassion is just masochism, but self-compassion without self-examination is just stagnation. The practice had practical effects. Marcus realized he was stronger in the mornings and weaker around 3 p.m., so he scheduled difficult conversations for first thing in the morning and routine tasks for the afternoon. He noticed that certain people triggered old patterns: the friend who always complained, the family member who criticized. He didn't cut off contact with them, but he prepared himself mentally before interacting with them. It's like having a coach who knows all your moves, except the coach is you. My own practice began after interviewing these people. Every night, I asked myself simple questions. Where did I listen attentively today? Where did I take things for granted instead of asking questions? Where did my ego get in the way of the story? The discomfort was immediate. I thought I was a good listener, but the examination showed me how often I was just waiting to speak. I prided myself on my objectivity, but the analysis revealed how my biases influenced all my questions. But the discomfort meant growth. Each examination improved the next day's interviews. They weren't perfect, but they were better. I met Thomas at his bankruptcy hearing. Former CEO, 3 companies, 2 divorces, a heart attack at 42. He sat in the courtroom hallway, strangely serene for someone who had lost everything. "You know what's funny?" he said, loosening his last expensive tie. "I spent 20 years climbing the wrong mountain. I got to the top and realized I was on the wrong mountain range." His story was a Silicon Valley classic. He dropped out of Stanford, founded his first startup at 23, and sold it for millions at 28. Magazine covers called him the next Jobs. He believed it. Success was simple math. More users, more revenue, more press. I measured everything: daily active users, consumption rate, market capitalization. I never measured whether I was becoming someone worthwhile. The second company grew even bigger, valued at $100 million, 300 employees, offices in 12 cities. Thomas worked 100 hours a week, slept in the office, missed his daughter's birthdays. My ex-wife once asked me, "What are you building?" I showed her the revenue forecasts. She said, "No, what are you building inside yourself?" I thought she was being philosophical. It turned out she was being accurate. The heart attack occurred during a board meeting. While discussing the quarterly forecasts, he felt a pain in his chest and everything went white. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed with his CFO asking him about the IPO schedule. Lying there with tubes everywhere, I had a moment of clarity. If I died at that moment, what would I leave behind? Money. My children barely knew me. Products? In 5 years, they would be obsolete. A legacy? It would be a footnote on Wikipedia. Thomas discovered Stoicism during his recovery. Of all people, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who had everything, wrote about how none of that mattered compared to character. The Stoics had one word, Arete, excellence of character. They said it was the only success that couldn't be taken away. Stock market crashes can't touch it. Death can't diminish it. It's the only wealth that remains. He started small. Instead of checking the stock market every morning, he asked himself, "How can I practice virtue today?" Instead of networking for advantages, he connected with others to help them. Instead of optimizing for profit, he optimized for principles. The board fired him 6 months later. It was the best thing that could have happened to me. They said I had lost focus. They were right. I had lost focus on the wrong things. Bankruptcy came from refusing to execute a strategy that would have saved the company but destroyed a competitor through questionable means. His lawyers called him a fool. His investors called him worse. But here's what I learned. External success is rented. You're always behind on the payments. There's always someone threatening to evict you. But virtue? That's all yours. No mortgage, no landlord. I thought about Thomas's words as I interviewed Maria, a teacher in South Chicago. 30 years in underfunded schools, a salary that barely covered the rent, students who sometimes didn't survive to graduation. People ask me why I stay. They show me schools in the suburbs with twice the salary, kids with laptops instead of empty stomachs. But success isn't where you teach, it's how you teach. Her classroom was her training ground for virtue. Courage meant standing between gang recruiters and her students. Temperance meant staying calm when parents yelled about grades. Justice meant fighting for resources that others said these kids didn't deserve. Wisdom meant knowing when to push and when to simply make space for pain. I got a call last week. A former student, graduated 15 years ago. He's a nurse now. He told me that I taught him that dignity isn't about what you have, but who you choose to be. That's success, not his salary, not even the fact that he escaped poverty. It's that he continues to pass on virtue. Maria showed me letters, hundreds of letters from former students. They weren't thank you notes for college recommendations or job references. They were letters about character lessons that had shaped them, about choosing integrity when it cost them dearly, about remembering her words in their darkest moments. Teachers don't get stock options. We get soul options, investments in human character that accumulate over generations. Dr. Rodriguez had learned this during his transition from star surgeon to professor. The accolades had been intoxicating. Youngest chief of surgery, pioneering techniques, conference presentations. I had a wall full of awards. Patients saw them and felt safe. But I knew the truth. Half of those awards were politics, not skill. And skill without virtue is just technique. The change came after a malpractice lawsuit. He hadn't done anything wrong from a medical standpoint, but he realized he had done something wrong from a human standpoint. He had treated the patient like a procedure, not like a person. The family's anger wasn't about the surgery, it was about his arrogance. I won the lawsuit, but I lost something more important. I saw myself clearly, technically excellent, ethically mediocre. He began teaching with a different measure of success. He didn't look at how many procedures the residents could perform, but how they treated the nurses. Not at their surgical speed, but at their honesty about mistakes. Not at their confidence, but at their compassion. Last year, I had a resident with brilliant hands, but a terrible temper. He lied about a mistake and blamed a nurse. The old me would have protected him. He had talent, he had potential. But potential for what? To be a skilled surgeon who corrupts medicine from within? Rodriguez suspended him. The administration objected. The residents' grades were exceptional. Rodriguez stood his ground. They said I was destroying a promising career. I said I was preventing future harm. Virtue isn't just personal, it's protective. Every time we choose character over achievement, we're building a better world. The stories piled up, each one challenging my own definitions. I had spent years chasing signatures, prestigious publications, important interviews. But what was I building? Sarah, from earlier chapters, had sent me a message. 1 year sober, no one knows except my sponsor. No celebrations, no social media posts, but I kept my word every day. That's my success. Marcus had written, "Today I turned down a consulting job. It was triple my salary as a teacher, but it was for a payday loan company. I can't build other people's character while compromising my own." The principal had shared, "The board wants grades up 10%. I want kids to learn integrity. Guess what really prepares them for life?" The pattern was clear. Everyone who had found true mental strength had shifted their metrics of success from external to internal. Not what they accumulated, but who they had become. Not their reputation, but their character. Not their achievements, but their virtue. Thomas and I sat in the courtroom hallway for 3 hours. In the end, He was teaching me Stoic concepts, with his bankruptcy papers forgotten beside him. "You know what's really funny?" he said as we parted. "I'm about to lose everything I've built in 20 years, and I've never been so successful." The notebook was nothing special. Black cover, lined pages, a coffee stain in the corner. But watching Detective Angela Chen write in it every morning at 5 a.m., before the chaos of the Baltimore streets took over her day, I understood that it was her armor. "3 questions," she would say, tapping her pen firmly. "What role am I going to play today? What virtues will I need? What tests will I have to pass?" She had learned this practice after her partner was killed. The department offered her therapy, time off, desk work. She preferred ancient philosophy. Therapy wanted me to process my feelings. I needed to process my decisions. Every morning I write down who I need to be, not feel, but be. Today, protective, investigative, witness. Today's virtues: courage to testify against a gang, temperance with a hostile suspect, justice despite pressure to close cases quickly. The 3rd question, which she called Premeditatio Malorum, was where she wrote down possible challenges. The suspect could flee, the witness could lie, the evidence could disappoint, politics could interfere. It's not pessimism, it's preparation. When the witness lied yesterday, I wasn't surprised or angry. I had already imagined that moment and decided how to respond. Her nightly ritual was different. 3 more questions. Where did I act virtuously? Where did I fail? What will I adjust tomorrow? No judgment, just observation, like reviewing footage from a body camera. What happened? What could be improved? Blame is useless. Learning is everything. That night I started my own journal. At first it seemed pretentious, forced, but Marcus had warned me about that when I interviewed him months earlier. The first week, you'll write whatever seems philosophical. The second week, you'll get bored. The third week, if you stick with it, you'll start writing the truth. That's when it becomes medicine. He had shown me his practice, different from Angela's, but equally disciplined. Every morning, he wrote scenarios of loss, not obsessing, but preparing. What if he lost his teaching job, his health, his marriage? It sounds dark, but it's liberating. I write that I lose my job, and then I plan. I would teach as a substitute, give private lessons, maybe write. I write that my wife leaves me, and then I remember that I would still have my character, my purpose, my ability to serve. Nothing external can really destroy us unless we allow it. This negative visualization had saved him when budget cuts threatened his job. While his colleagues panicked, he remained calm. He had already lived through that loss 20 times in his journal. It didn't make it painless, it made it manageable. It's the difference between a punch you don't see coming and one you do. Both hurt, but one doesn't knock you down. Dr. Rodriguez had taught me a different exercise. He called it the view from above, a mental zoom out when situations felt overwhelming. In the middle of a 10-hour operation, with everything going wrong, I pause. I picture myself from above, a surgeon in an operating room, in a hospital, in a city, on a planet. My crisis shrinks to its actual size. Perspective is the medicine for panic. He had taught it to residents who were drowning under the pressure of perfection. She had them practice it during simple procedures to develop the mental fortitude necessary for when a real crisis struck. One resident told me it saved her life when her first patient died. Instead of drowning in guilt, she stepped back and saw herself as a human being doing the best she could in an imperfect world. She still suffered, but she didn't break down. Sarah had developed her own technique through trial and error. She called it the pause, a physical exercise that created mental space. I feel the urge to drink, lie, run away. I literally stop myself. I count 5 breaths. That's it. But in those 5 breaths, I remember who I have chosen to be. The urge doesn't go away, but I face it as myself, not as my addiction. The day we spoke, she had been sober for 6 months. She didn't celebrate. It was just another day of 5 breath pauses. People think mental strength is something huge. It's not. It's the space between the trigger and the response. If you extend that space, even by a few seconds, you change everything. The director had shown me his nighttime ritual, a single question written at the top of a page. What did I learn today? Not what happened or what went right or wrong, but what he learned. A bad day, I learned to be patient. A good day, I learned to be grateful. A boring day, I learned to be present. There's always a lesson if you're willing to learn. His journals filled a bookshelf. 15 years of daily lessons. He pulled one out at random and read an entry from 5 years ago about a student who had threatened him. At the end it said, I learned that anger is often fear in disguise. That kid is in college now. He sends me updates. But even if he had ended up in jail, the lesson would still be the same. We don't control the outcomes. We control what we get out of the experience. Maria, the teacher in Chicago, had a very simple practice. Every morning she stood at her classroom door and set an intention. Not a goal, an intention. Today I will be patient. Today I will see strength where others see shortcomings. Today I will teach algebra and dignity. Simple, specific, possible. Her nighttime practice was just as simple. Before leaving, she knocked on the same door and asked herself, did I keep my word? Some days yes, some days no. But asking the question is the practice. That's what strengthens the muscle. He had been taking notes for months, collecting these practices as if they were recipes. But Thomas, on the verge of bankruptcy, had given me the most profound insight. Everyone thinks these exercises are about becoming better people. They're not. They're about remembering who we are. Every morning, every afternoon, every break, we remember who we have chosen to be. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who we've always been beneath the noise. I had spent a year collecting these stories, these practices, these proofs that ancient wisdom still worked in modern chaos. But sitting in my apartment that last night, with the transcripts and notes scattered across my desk, I realized that something fundamental was missing. The phone rang. It was Marcus. We had stayed in touch since that first conversation about elections and arrows. Are you still writing about us, the Stoics? His voice had that familiar steadiness. I'm trying to make sense of it all. All the people I've interviewed have different practices, different approaches, but there's something that connects them. What do you think it is? I looked at my notes. Angela's morning questions, Rodriguez's bird's eye view, Sarah's 5 breath pauses, all different, but somehow the same. They're all choosing, I said. Each practice is really choosing who to be before life chooses for them. Marcus's silence sounded like approval. Do you know what Marcus Aurelius wrote? At dawn, when it's hard to get out of bed, repeat to yourself, I have to go to work as a human being, not as a victim, not as a hero, not as anything special, just as a human being with a human job to do. That hit me. All the people I had interviewed weren't trying to be superhuman. They were trying to be fully human. The practices aren't what's important, Marcus continued. They're scaffolding. Ways to remind ourselves that we always have a choice. Even when everything else is taken away from us, our work, our health, our relationships, we still choose our response. That's not a consolation, it's power. After hanging up, I took out a new notebook. This time, it wasn't for taking notes on the interview, but for summarizing. What had I really learned? The first principle was the clearest, the dichotomy of control. Everyone had internalized it deeply, not as theory, but as daily practice. Angela choosing her thoughts each morning, Thomas choosing his response to bankruptcy, Sarah choosing to breathe instead of drink. They had all learned what the Stoics knew. We control our judgments, our decisions, and our actions. Nothing else. Not outcomes, not other people's opinions, not even our own bodies in the end. But those three things, judgments, decisions, and actions, were enough. They were everything. The second principle was woven into every story, perception as choice. Dr. Rodriguez saw crisis as perspective. The principal saw challenge as fear. Maria saw struggling students as diamonds forming under pressure. None of them denied reality. They chose their relationship to it. The same event, job loss, addiction, violence, could be a catastrophe or a lesson, depending on the prism through which it was viewed. They had learned to deliberately shift their prism, seeking the angle that made them stronger, more lucid, and more capable of serving others. The third principle was Amor fati, love of fate. This is not passive acceptance, but active acceptance. Thomas plans for losses before they arrive, and when they do, he welcomes them as old acquaintances. Sarah accepts her addiction as part of her story, not as a shame. The director even treats threats as teachers. They had discovered what Nietzsche later captured, that one should not want anything to be different, neither forward nor backward, nor in all eternity, not merely endure what is necessary, and even less hide it, but love it. The fourth principle was lived out in their daily practices, discipline as freedom. Every morning ritual, every evening review, every pause between trigger and response was not a restriction, but a liberation, a structure that created space, habits that generated options. Maria's daily intentions did not limit her spontaneity, but focused her power. Rodriguez's mental zooms did not avoid reality, but saw it clearly. The practices were boundaries that created freedom within, like the banks that give strength to a river. The fifth principle appeared in how they treated others, justice as strength. None of them had taken refuge in pure self-improvement. Their mental strength served a greater purpose. Angela strengthened herself to strengthen the young lawyers. The director stood firm so that the students could find their way. Sarah stopped drinking not only for herself, but for the daughter she hoped to have one day. They understood what Aurelio meant. What does not benefit the hive does not benefit the bee. Individual strength without service was just toughness, but strength in the service of others, that was virtue. The final principle tied it all together. Virtue as the only true good, not success, not comfort, not even survival, but virtue. Doing the right thing even when it was hard. Telling the truth when it was easier to lie. Maintaining integrity when compromise seemed reasonable. This wasn't moral rigidity, but moral clarity. They had found what the Stoics promised, an internal compass that worked in any storm, not because it pointed to safety, but because it pointed to meaning. Looking at these principles, I understood what Thomas meant by remembering yourself. Mental toughness wasn't about becoming invulnerable, but about becoming incorruptible. not in the sense of moral perfection, but in the sense of maintaining your essential nature regardless of external pressure. All the people I had interviewed had been forged by hardship. But hardship hadn't created their strength. It had revealed it. Practices, principles, daily decisions, these were just ways of staying in touch with who they really were beneath the roles, pressures, and fears. I realized that mental toughness wasn't a response to adversity. It was a way of being that made adversity irrelevant. It wasn't painless, but it was irrelevant to your fundamental purpose, your basic choice about who to be. The Stoics had discovered something that transcended their time. Strength is not measured by what you can endure, but by what you can sustain. It's not about your possessions, your position, or even your health, but about your character, your purpose, your choice to live as a human being doing human work. That's what connected all the stories, all the practices, all the transformed lives I had documented. Each person had stopped waiting for circumstances to improve and had started improving their response to circumstances. They had found inner strength and learned to live from it. Developing mental strength is not about avoiding challenges, but about facing them with strength, clarity, and determination. By adopting the Stoic principles of discipline, control, and resilience, you have opened the door to a stronger, more focused mind. Now you have the tools to turn every obstacle into an opportunity, to make decisions with courage, and to thrive no matter what circumstances you face. But remember, mental strength is a practice, not a destination. Every day is an opportunity to refine your character, strengthen your will, and stand firm in the face of life's uncertainties. Now, I want to hear from you. Which Stoic principle will you apply today to develop your mental strength? Leave your comments below and let's start a conversation about how we can grow together and become stronger. If you found this guide useful and want more tips on mastering your mind, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Stay committed, stay strong, and keep building. See you next time.